Chapter 54:28. Inside and outside the door was a completely different world. If the stench from outside was said to be nauseating, then inside the stone door was the long-awaited hell on earth. Cages were placed on the wall, and each cage held 7 to 8 people. Some of the cages were hung high on the dome, and most of them were hung on the wall. In the large space, there were 20 to 30 cages, and hundreds of people were imprisoned here. Some were missing arms and legs, and some were on the verge of death. Some were old and clumsy, and their eyes were cloudy. Young people with drooping heads and lifeless bodies could be found everywhere. Arbor and the others looked around, and couldn't help but be secretly shocked. Qi Xian held the little fatty's arm tightly and followed him a few steps forward. She couldn't help but feel a little panicked. These people, Arbor's face was calm, and he reached out to release the old mayor. He said in a low voice, "Uncle, go up and identify them." The old mayor was already stunned by the scene in front of him. He shakily reached out and called out the names of the cages one by one. For a moment, he beat his chest and stamped his feet, and tears flowed down his old face. It seemed that the people imprisoned here were all Mausoleum Town residents who had recently been absorbed into the bright light and were undergoing continuous transformation. Arbor sighed slightly, and he felt a little melancholy in his heart. If these people could be a little more vigilant and be a little more vigilant, perhaps the outcome wouldn't be like this. How could there be such a good thing in this world? The bright light took advantage of everyone's fear and used a holy fruit to deceive them into joining the bright light. Unfortunately, they didn't use their brains to think carefully. Even if the bright light really had holy fruits, would the number of holy fruits be enough for them to use? Would they be able to afford the cost of using the holy fruit? The old mayor suddenly fell to the ground and said with a mournful face, "Crown Princess. Can they be saved?" Arbor said with a heavy heart, "It's not clear yet. We need to let people check one by one to know. If they haven't completely turned into corpses, perhaps there is still a way to save them." The old mayor sat on the ground in a daze, and 2 lines of old tears flowed down his face. Mausoleum Town had more than 100 families, and everyone was very familiar with each other. There were more than 100 families in the town, and most of them were related by blood. Now, seeing all his relatives and friends become like this, the old mayor was filled with sorrow. Mata stepped forward and patted the old mayor's back. "Old man, let me help you sit over there for a while." The old man had suffered such a huge blow that his mood was on a roller coaster ride. He was afraid that he would pass out at any time. Mata helped him to a clean place to sit down. Arbor raised his hand and called several shadow guards over, whispering a few words in their ears. She turned to Mo Lien and said, "I'll let Huang He and the others take over here. See if you can help them." Mo Lien nodded. She was also in a bad mood. She pulled Arbor and walked towards Wei Su, who had fallen to the ground and was restrained by the spirit sealing rope. At this moment, Wei Su was tightly bound by the god sealing rope and was struggling with all his might. Seeing the 2 fiends walking over, Wei Su roared furiously and struggled against the god-locking rope that bound him. However, the god-locking rope could be big or small, loose or tight. The more he made a fuss, the more it wrapped around him. Wei Su shook his head and roared twice, glaring at the 2 of them fiercely. That pair of gray, lifeless eyes stared unblinkingly at the husband and wife. Chapter 54:29. A hint of anger flashed through Mo Lien's eyes. Look, these people who used to live normal lives were now ruined by Tian Yun. Wei Su was like this, and so were all the townspeople of Maolin Town. Just how many people was Tian Yun going to harm before they were willing to give up? Roar! Wei Su let out a deep roar from the depths of his throat, and his limbs suddenly contracted. The god-locking rope also suddenly contracted around his body. Arbor raised his eyebrows slightly and stared at Wei Su's sudden bone-shrinking appearance. He hooked a stream of water spirit energy between his fingers. Could it be that the young island master of Medicine King Island also obtained a special ability before he turned into a corpse? Something like a bone-shrinking skill? She suddenly released a strong stream of water spirit energy towards the person in front of her. In the blink of an eye, Wei Su suddenly jumped up from the ground. He couldn't get rid of the god-locking rope binding his body. After all, the god-locking rope was a divine weapon made by Mo Yen. It could be long or short, big or small. No matter how his bones contracted, the god-locking rope couldn't possibly let him escape without Jojo's Lotus Divine Sense undoing it. However, Wei Su's current appearance was indeed a little strange. Although his body was bound by the god-locking rope, his hands became longer and turned outwards under the chains. His two deformed hands grabbed towards Arbor's neck. The water spirit that Xiaomu released was struck by the fire spirit that Wei Su flicked out, and the two spirits formed a powerful current in midair. Then, they separated upon contact, flickering and extinguishing like fireworks. Mo Yen frowned slightly. She flashed in front of Jojo and used her sword to knock away the deformed and elongated left hand that was rushing towards Jojo. Looking at Wei Su's left hand now, it was completely different from a normal human's hand. The collision just now was like hitting an iron plate. It was so solid that it was surprising. Mo Yen couldn't help but frown again and glanced coldly in Wei Su's direction. This Wei Su, after turning into a corpse, could still use the fire spirit box. It was indeed unexpected. Arbor also noticed this. Therefore, a rank 3 special zombie puppet was completely different from other zombie puppets. It was probably close to becoming a perfect zombie. Therefore, it was a little difficult to deal with it. Arbor tossed over several binding talismans. The light of the talismans flowed and formed a binding talisman array around the corpse puppet, firmly fixing it within. At the same time, Mo Yen flicked his wrist and wrapped the spirit-locking rope around his two arms. As such, the ends of the 3 god-locking ropes were held in place by the 3 young hidden guards. Even though Wei Su had immense strength after his mutation, he was still like a trapped beast, completely unable to move. Wei Su kept struggling and twisting his body, howling and screaming. The old mayor, who was sitting paralyzed on the side, had long been frightened by the scene in front of him. He couldn't even speak. This was simply too terrifying. Who would have thought that these ignorant villagers would actually change into such a terrifying monster after joining Zhaoguang? His whole body trembled slightly, and he couldn't help but shrink back. Seeing this, Mata turned around and comforted him. "Don't be afraid, old man. This corpse puppet is already under control. It won't jump out to harm people again." The old mayor nodded fearfully and wiped away the tears in his eyes. He sat there absent-mindedly, staring blankly at the corpses of the townsfolk locked in the earth cage. With a glance, he discovered that his daughter-in-law and 2 nephews were also locked in the cage. Chapter 54:30. Thinking of his young grandchildren asking about their mother's whereabouts, the old mayor couldn't help but cry. When his daughter-in-law went to Zhaoguang to ask for holy water, they all tacitly agreed. He didn't expect that his stupidity would harm his family and his 2 children, causing them to lose their mother's care. On the other side, when Huang He rushed over with the members of the Heavenly Pill Association, it was already half an hour later. This stone room had been slightly cleaned by the secret guards. They took down all the cages hanging on the wall. Now, the 20 to 30 cages were neatly placed in the stone room. The surroundings were illuminated by several fist-sized luminous pearls, making it as bright as day. Xiao Mu walked up to greet Huang He and the others. She then pointed at Wei Su, who was bound by the 3 spirit sealing ropes. "It's a special class rank 3 zombie. We have already subdued him. Is Mr. Su here?" A middle-aged man quickly walked forward and bowed. "Greetings, Crown Princess." "Greetings, Your Highness." "Mr. Su, you don't have to be so polite." Arbor nodded slightly at him, then took out a box from his inner world and handed it to him. I heard that you're already in the middle of the third stage of the antidote experiment. I, the Crown Princess, have created a kind of recovery potion here. I wonder if I can help you. In fact, this potion was created by the little Crown Princess grinding a holy fruit and adding a few herbs to dilute it. The little tree had already borne more than a dozen holy fruits. Although it was many times faster than in the past, the speed of the results was many times faster. However, compared to the many zombies in the world, a mere dozen holy fruits really couldn't help much. Moreover, Lord Jojo had her own selfish motives. She couldn't use all kinds of methods to hasten the growth of the little tree that had accompanied her until now. She also couldn't selflessly contribute all the holy fruits to the world without reservation. There were only a dozen holy fruits in total. At a critical moment, one could save a life. Naturally, she still wanted to use it for her friends and comrades. She could only say that she would do her best to help Fairy Huang He, Mr. Su, and the others make the antidote. This kind of diluted recovery liquid may be of great help to Mr. Su and the others in refining the three-stage detoxification liquid in the future. However, if it wasn't of much help, she could only help and obtain another saint fruit to test the medicinal liquid. Mr. Su couldn't hide his excitement. He reached out and took the box of medicine from the little Crown Princess. Opening the box, he saw two neat rows of small potion bottles stacked neatly inside the box. There were a total of 20 bottles. Mr. Su quickly nodded and said, "Crown Princess, don't worry. I will do my best to carry out the third stage of the antidote test with Fairy Huang He as soon as possible." Arbor nodded in relief. She trusted Mr. Su. After all, he was someone that Jojo's Lotus valued. Not only was he smart and courageous, he was also proficient in the art of formations, mechanisms, elixirs, and talismans. He was not an ordinary person. Fairy Yellow Crane took a step forward and looked at the surroundings. Her expression was serious. "Jojo, these people." There were actually 200 people here, and from the looks of it, they had all been passively transformed. The auras on these people were faintly discernible, and there was no sign of life. Mo Lien waved her hand and released the townsfolk of Maolin Town from the storage talisman. Once everyone came out, they quickly shrank in a corner and saw the scene in front of them clearly. Chapter 54-31. They wailed and wailed, looking like they wanted to approach the wooden cages but did not dare to. Mo Lien said indifferently, "You can go over and say your goodbyes. At least 90% of the people here can't be saved." He had only glanced at them indifferently. More than 90% of them were corpses. Only about 10% of them seemed to have the aura of living people. It was unknown if the antidote could pull them back. As soon as the Crown Prince said that, the townsfolk stumbled over and cried out in pain through the wooden cages. The scene of life and death parting made one's heart ache a little. Even though Arbor was used to such scenes, he still found it hard to bear. He turned around and sighed softly. Fairy Yellow He and company could not help but sigh as well. They looked sympathetically at the wailing crowd. If Tianyun had not been so ruthless and caused so much trouble, how could these townsfolk have lost so many of their loved ones in one night? Tianyun is too hateful. A young female alchemist clenched her fists in anger and could not help but shout. Huang He sighed and nodded slightly at a man beside him. "Are the carriages and horses ready? Move these cages onto the carriage and send them back to our experimental base first." Fairy Yellow He and Mr. Su had set up an antidote experimental base in the outskirts of Sovereign Capital. Now, all the things they talked about were related to that place. More than 90% of the Heavenly Pill Firm's members had gone to the base in the outskirts. Only 10% of the alchemists remained in the city to continue running the Heavenly Pill Firm. Although Yellow He sympathized with the townsfolk who were separated by life and death, he still had to finish what he had to do as soon as possible. If he could extract the corpse poison from these people as soon as possible, he could analyze it faster. It would further advance the development of the antidote. If these corpse puppets were to be graded, the corpse poison content of the special class corpse puppets was the highest. Just a casual touch could turn a person into a corpse in a matter of minutes. Under the persuasion of Yellow He and Mr. Su, the townsfolk finally walked out of the stone door while grieving and supporting each other. They watched as the wooden cages were moved out and placed on the carriage. The sound of the carriage wheels gradually faded into the distance. The townspeople of Maolin Town, from top to bottom, all had extremely blurry eyes. They knew very well that they would never see each other again after today's parting. Perhaps a few of them could be saved, but that was only a sliver of hope. His return was uncertain and difficult to find. Sir Jojo stood there with a cold expression as he watched the trussed-up Wei Su leave. He even ordered 10 hidden guards to follow him. After all, even though Wei Su had been subdued, his strength still remained. The safety of the people in the Heavenly Pill firm naturally had to be ensured. Mo Lien saw her solemn expression and hurriedly walked up to her. She gently tugged at her little hand. "Jojo, don't be sad, okay? Everything will slowly get better. After we deal with the matters here, we will meet up with Duan Yu and the rest." At present, Duan Yu had already led his men to the vicinity of the kingdom of Qingzhou. According to his message, he suspected that the headquarters of the Heavenly Fate organization was most likely in Qingzhou. But that was to be expected. Qingzhou was located outside of Tsang province and Ming province, so it had always abided by the law and paid tribute every year. If it weren't for the sudden news of the Heavenly Fate organization being conquered, no one would set their sights on such a small kingdom. Chapter 54-32. However, Qingzhou was only so big. Could it be that Tianyun had built another underground base in Qingzhou? That made sense. After all, it was a method that Tianyun, this group of people who loved to dig rat holes, would often use. If someone were to come and tell him that the entire underground area of Qingzhou had been requisitioned by Tianyun's people and built into an underground palace, he would be shocked. Mo Lien really wouldn't feel the slightest bit surprised. From the Crown Prince's point of view, the way Tianyun and his people did things was just that standard. Arbor took a deep breath and turned to meet the Crown Prince's eyes. His expression couldn't help but be a bit weary. "Let's go back." Sapling said earlier that he didn't sense any information from the fragment. I suspect that the last fragment should have been moved away by someone. Since Xiaoguan was Tianyun's lackey, then she definitely had reason to suspect that this Holywood fragment might be a pretense that family head Qin used to tease her. Now, it was very likely that the fragment had been taken back by family head Qin. So this place couldn't be found at all. The fragment might still be in family head Qin's hands. Thinking about it, such an important thing couldn't just be thrown to Mu Jingfeng's group. Family head Qin would definitely firmly grasp it in his hands. Jojo was very displeased that they couldn't find Qiuqiu's last fragment. His head drooped listlessly, and he was a bit unhappy to speak. Mo Lien couldn't help but laugh when she saw this. She raised a hand to rub his head and softly said, "All right, don't be uncomfortable. Qiuqiu's fragment naturally belongs to our Jojo. It will roll back sooner or later." Arbor thought that was true. The Holywood had a spirit, even if it was just a small fragment. It must also want to return to its master's side as soon as possible. "Jojo, let's go back to the city first." This place was filled with the stench of blood, and it was truly nauseating. Needless to say, Arbor didn't want to stay here for a long time. Hearing this, he nodded at Mo Lien, and she reached out to lead him up the stone steps. When the group exited the underground passage and finally returned to the surface, they couldn't help but exhale. Everyone couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. They felt that the unpleasant smell of blood that lingered in their noses had finally faded a lot. Arbor recalled Qi Xianxian and the rest and turned to look at the 3 people from the Dou clan. These 3 people had helped them quite a bit along the way. Even Dou Fengqi, who was usually very annoying, seemed to be much more responsible in front of an extreme organization like Tianyun. Prince Mo expressed his gratitude, causing the Dou brothers to feel somewhat fearful. After all, with His Highness's current status, there was no need for him to be so courteous with them. After the 3 Dou clan members left, Mo Lien summoned Little Seven and carried Arbor onto the dragon's back, flying towards the inner city. In the blink of an eye, he had arrived at the Eastern Palace. The 2 of them were preparing to return to the palace hand in hand to wash up and catch up on sleep. Hu Dequan, eunuch who had been waiting for a long time, ran over with a bitter face. With a round and fat face, he smiled and said to the 2 of them, "Your Highness Crown Prince, Crown Princess, this old servant has the Empress instructions. If the 2 of you return, please make a trip to Madame Goen's residence." The 2 of them looked at each other in dismay. What happened? Hu Dequan's face was full of smiles. He didn't dare to offend this troublesome couple in front of him at all. This servant heard that Madame Goen was assassinated. Chapter 54-33. The young couple looked at each other and saw a trace of disapproval in each other's eyes. Hu Dequan's heart couldn't help but beat like a drum when he saw that the 2 didn't speak. Eunuch Hu stealthily glanced at the 2 little fiends and said in a low voice with an obscure expression, "Your Highness, Crown Princess, if the 2 of you feel a bit tired and want to rest a bit before going, that's fine. This old servant can wait outside the door." Eunuch Hu wanted to burst into tears. Why did His Majesty and Her Majesty keep having him provoke these 2 little fiends? Couldn't they send someone else? Arbor cast him a glance, a bit perplexed as to why this old eunuch's expression was so rich. The little stoic said with a stiff expression, "Lead the way." Hu Dequan was taken aback, but he quickly agreed and repeatedly said okay. He hastily turned around and hurriedly walked outside while shouting, "Why aren't you quickly preparing the carriage? It's freezing outside, so add a few hand warmers inside the carriage." The little stoic Crown Princess didn't have much of an expression as she was led out of the Eastern Palace's main entrance by Prince Mo. When they boarded the carriage, the little stoic asked icily, "Is it your Emperor who suspects that the Crown Prince and I killed that Madam of the Ministry of National Security overnight?" Hu Dequan almost fell head first onto the ground. He naturally didn't dare to reply and hastily shook his head while saying, "You're wrongly accusing me, Crown Princess. His Majesty treats the 2 of you with fatherly love, so he definitely wouldn't suspect you." As soon as he finished speaking, he saw the Crown Prince and Crown Princess both staring at him expressionlessly. Hu Dequan almost bit his own tongue, and he wanted to cry even more but had no tears. The Emperor always made things difficult for him. He always threw him, a lackey, into the crevice and had difficulty breathing to survive. It was truly very sullen for him to always be pressured by the Crown Prince and Crown Princess and live a tight life. Hu Dequan saw that the 2 of them didn't say anything else. After they boarded the carriage and lowered the curtains, the old eunuch finally raised his sleeve to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead as a chill ran down his spine. Oh my God, this really made people feel a little scared. This Crown Princess didn't look like she had much to say on a normal day, but it couldn't be helped that she was more intelligent than others. Once he opened his mouth, everything he said was accurate. Wasn't it because the great emperor courted death by thinking that the death of the Madam of the Goen family had something to do with this bastard couple? Speaking of which, Hu Dequan also believed that the death of Madame Goen might be related to the Crown Prince and his wife. After all, the young Crown Princess and Madame Goen had a deep grudge against each other. Although their relationship had eased a lot recently, it was only because Madame Goen did not seek trouble with the Crown Princess. But what if the Madam of the National Security Agency returned to her old ways and made the little Crown Princess unhappy again? No one knew if something else had happened between the 2 of them. Speaking of which, after the Crown Princess returned from the River of Forgetfulness, it seemed that her days were not peaceful. Every day was extremely thrilling. Previously, the City of Shadows had just attacked them, but now, they had destroyed the entire City of Shadows with the power of lightning. Sometimes, Tianyun would make a move, and sometimes, the Qingzhou kingdom would fall. Previously, the people of Zhaoguang were about to do something in the imperial capital, but later, they were arrested and imprisoned by the crown princess. The imperial court raided one house after another every 2 or 3 days, causing everyone to be in a state of panic. Everyone looked at the crown prince as if he was a fiend. Their days were miserable. Chapter 54-34. Things seem to have calmed down quite a bit recently, but Madame Goen had suddenly died in her residence. Strange things were happening every day. As a servant, he couldn't help but be on tenterhooks as he sat in the depths of the palace. It was hard to say when something would happen in the depths of the palace. Eunuch who walked in front of the carriage and stole glances at the carriage through the curtain from time to time. Although he knew that he couldn't see the movements of the 2 people in the carriage, Eunuch who couldn't help but glance in their direction. Madame Goen's residence wasn't in a remote area. After passing through Changle Street and detouring to the neighboring street, they arrived at their destination in no time. The junior eunuchs rushed forward to help the crown princess. But the young crown princess waved her hand and leaped to the ground, walking towards the main entrance. She didn't need anyone to help her. It wasn't as if she was missing an arm or a leg. Mo Lien caught up with her in amusement and asked in a low voice, "Jojo, are you angry?" "Humph." The young crown princess rolled her eyes and complained softly, "When something happened, your father's first instinct was that it was us who did it." "Why do you think he would think that?" The crown prince had a profound expression on his face. He rubbed his chin and nodded, saying, "Maybe he thinks that Goen has an unsettled feud with us." Arbor wagged a finger at him, "That's not the reason. It's your father who thinks that we're scammers." Arbor pointed out without batting an eyelid, "It's not the first time he thinks that we're scammers. Whenever there's a slight disturbance, he'll easily link it to us." Mo Lien, his wife's words seemed to make sense. The crown prince pursed his lips and reached out to hold his wife's small hand, muttering, "How are we scammers? Most of the time, we're very reasonable with people." Arbor nodded in agreement, "That's right, we've never scammed people." Eunuch who had followed the 2 through the door, almost tripped over the high threshold. He really wanted to ask the 2 nobles in front of him, "You 2 have probably long forgotten about all the things that happened in the past, right?" Hand in hand, the young couple stepped through the door and were led to the central courtyard by the servants. After entering the arch of hanging flowers, they saw a corpse covered in a white cloth lying at the bottom of the long corridor. Bai Wuxia was leading the head palace maid, Pearl, and the others to sit in the small pavilion opposite. When she saw the 2 of them approaching from afar, she stood up and walked down from the small pavilion. She smiled and greeted them, "Mo Lien, Jojo, you're here. Come and help Imperial Mother take a look. This Goen's death is a bit strange." "Nyang nyang." Zhenju hurriedly went forward and reminded her in a small voice. The Empress suddenly thought of something and hurriedly pulled Arbor's hand. Goen died in an undignified manner. His entire body is somewhat, the Empress thought for a long time and finally told the truth, "My whole body was cut up. If you don't like it, you don't have to look at it." Arbor, on the other hand, became curious after hearing the Empress's explanation. Goen's wife was actually so pitiful. Not only was she assassinated in her residence, but her entire body was also cut up. How much hatred and resentment must there be to make Her Majesty so embarrassed to talk about it? Arbor's curiosity was piqued. He held the Empress's hand and said, "Imperial Mother, Jojo is not afraid." Bai Wuxia smiled and nodded repeatedly. He had to mentally prepare his daughter-in-law first. Chapter 54-35. Otherwise, when she lifted the white cloth and saw Goen's appearance, she would be frightened. From the beginning to the end, Empress Bai had never considered whether she would scare her son. In her opinion, her son was a man. If he couldn't even see this little bit of blood, how could he protect his wife and children in the future? The Empress asked someone to remove the white cloth covering Goen's body. The young couple took a look and couldn't help but gasp. The person who came was really good. It was rare for them to see such a badly mutilated corpse. Goen's body was really incomplete from top to bottom. Especially that face, it could almost give people nightmares. The face in front of them couldn't see Goen's original appearance at all. His entire face had been dug out, leaving behind only a few terrifying holes. Arbor couldn't bear to look and turned his eyes away. He thought to himself, who did Goen provoke? Even after her death, she can't be left in peace. Sigh. Wuxia sighed and said in a low voice, and this is after cleaning. You didn't see it at first. Wuxia shook his head and said, her whole body is bloody. There's a piece missing from her body. It's fine if she's missing an arm or a leg. Her face has been dug out like this. If it weren't for a few bold women helping to clean it up, the corpse would be even more incomplete. That person must have a lot of hatred for her. Not only did she dig out her eyes, but she also made her unable to see in the netherworld. She also cut off her ears and nose, making her lose her 5 senses. In the end, she even sealed her mouth with a ball of mud. When Wuxia said this, he couldn't help but sigh faintly. This is to make Goen unable to reason even if she goes to the netherworld and sees the king of hell. The little crown princess couldn't help but raise her eyebrows and say something conscientious. There's no such thing as hatred for no reason in this world. There's cause and effect first. Madam can't blame others for her current state. The corners of Prince Mo's lips curled up slightly. He knew that his little wife would scold anyone she saw, even if it was her mother, who she had a good relationship with. As a little wife who had a bottom line of justice in her heart, she would side with reason and not family. Wuxia was stunned. He secretly glanced at his daughter-in-law's expressionless face and secretly found it funny. She quickly nodded and followed Jojo's words. It's not that I sympathize with the National Security Agency, I'm just a little sad. After all, ever since Goen became her father's adopted daughter, she had Glory City to take care of her. Her days had been pretty good. Then, Wuxia became the Empress of Shenzhou. She became the Empress's sworn sister openly and was given the title of Madam of the National Security Agency. She lived a carefree life like a fairy. As long as she didn't cause too much trouble, she would be able to live a carefree life without worrying about food and clothing for the rest of her life. Your Highness. A hidden guard hurriedly ran over and whispered a few words. Wuxia's expression changed slightly. He frowned and asked, how many people? I estimate that there are more than 10 of them. They're all locked up in the cellar at the back. Some of them look like they're about to die. Empress Bai coughed softly and subconsciously glanced at her daughter-in-law. Seeing the little fellow's expressionless face, his heart began to beat faster for no reason. Cough. Then why hasn't anyone mentioned this before? Goen is really outrageous, Empress Bai said. Release them first, then pacify them properly. The little expressionless had already heard it clearly. She said expressionlessly, she kidnapped a man and hid him at home. Chapter 54-36. Others must also have nowhere to seek redress for their grievances. For relatives like this who bully others, I would have dealt with them 800 years ago. It was impossible to allow them to jump up and down until now. Arbor continued coldly, this person is so disgusting, she should be punished. The Crown Prince hurriedly nodded, yes. Families have family rules, and countries have national laws. Goen arbitrarily detained people in the cellar at home, which is a violation of national laws, and must be severely punished. White Empress, the Empress now felt a little empathetic and understood His Majesty's feelings. The son was completely from the wife's country, and whatever the wife said was right. This was really worrying. Goen was already dead, how could they punish her? We must seize Goen's title and confiscate all her assets. The Crown Prince's handsome face was cold as he said righteously, part of it will go to the national treasury. Part of it will go to the victim's family. Comfort the victim's family. When the young Crown Prince Consort heard this, she nodded in full agreement. Her small face was taut. The Crown Prince is extremely right. Mother, you mustn't shield them for the sake of Glory City's and grandfather's face, unable to differentiate right from wrong. White Empress, actually, it's not that serious. The old steward of Goen's residence couldn't help but wipe the cold sweat off his forehead. He knelt on the ground and cried out, Her Majesty is Madame's foster sister and has accompanied Madame for decades. Hearing this, the little Crown Princess was furious. You're still playing the sympathy card at this time. The old steward hurriedly cried out miserably, but Madame is now dead, and died in such an undignified manner. If this matter is made public, first, it will smear the royal family's face, and second, it will be hard to explain to the old city lord. The little Crown Princess said coldly, This is what you get for doing wrong. She only has herself to blame, so don't blame the heavens for being blind. If everyone is like her, relying on His Majesty and the Empress's power to snatch men and women from the common people, then how will the common people live? Will they still be able to live in peace? A man can't stand without integrity, and a country can't stand without integrity. If I were mother, I would throw this person to the city gate and whip her corpse for 3 days as a warning. The Empress suddenly widened her eyes. She now firmly believed His Majesty's words. No wonder His Majesty had a headache every time he saw his daughter-in-law. She was really a troublesome little girl. If anyone dares to use my name to do evil deeds outside, I will punish them and make sure that their entire family will have to bear the consequences. Let them know that it's not easy to be my relative. Crown Prince was speechless. The Empress, everyone was speechless. It was true. Being a relative of the little Crown Princess was never easy. Everyone knew that. Jojo. Empress Bai stuttered, the National Security Agency has indeed done wrong, but now, she has only herself to blame for her own death. If we throw the corpse out and whip it, it's not very respectful to the corpse. Furthermore, Glory City would lose face. Prince Mo's mouth twitched. See, Imperial Mother is stuttering now. She's regretting it now. Previously, she had seriously called the husband and wife over to see if they had anything to do with this matter. Hee. She's unlucky. Empress Bai was extremely regretful. She hurriedly blinked her eyes and said, How about this? We'll do as the Crown Prince said, take away her title, and move her out of the capital for burial. What do you think? Chapter 54-37. Imperial Mother, get someone to properly apologize to the families of the victims. Properly compensate them. Arbor looked deeply at the Empress. There are many things that cannot be compensated. The harm they suffered, the loss of dignity, these things cannot be compensated at all. Actually, people in high positions could not understand the suffering of the world at all. They were born with pride, coldness, and indifference. For example, the Empress, and even Jojo's Lotus, in reality, they could not truly understand the feeling of being locked up in a dark cellar, unable to cry out for help. Only those who had truly experienced it could clearly understand that feeling of despair, as well as the feeling of losing their dignity bit by bit. She did not blame them, because no one could understand at all. From their point of view, those beautiful young men who had been imprisoned in the cellar had indeed suffered a little. But now that they had been rescued, all they needed to do was to compensate them. Generous compensation would make their lives easier in the future, and that would be a great favor from the imperial family. But in reality, once that kind of terrible damage was done, it was impossible to erase the psychological shadow. The Crown Prince was used to looking at his wife's expression. At this time, when he saw her depressed expression, his heart suddenly thumped. He quickly stepped forward to grab Arbor's little hand, and turned to the Empress to say in a low voice, Mother. The National Security Agency has simply disgraced you. Do you still want to protect her? It should be as Jojo said, throw her at the city gate and flog her for 3 days as a warning to others. In the future, let all the relatives of the imperial family be good people, and do not follow the example of the National Security Agency. This crown prince will not be merciful to any of them. What uncles, aunts, and concubines? As long as they dare to violate the laws of the country, oppress the common people, and fish in the countryside, they will all die. They must die. The Empress, son, you've fallen too quickly. Just now, you said that you would seize the title of the National Security Agency and confiscate all the family assets, but you did not say that you would further flog the corpse. Who would have thought that in the next second, you would change your mind and support your wife's idea of flogging the corpse? For your wife, you really don't care about anything else. You can even raise your eyebrows at your mother. What's the point of me raising you? On the carriage back to the Eastern Palace, Missouri Lien looked at his wife sitting there listlessly without saying anything. His heart couldn't help but beat like a drum. He approached her and pulled her into his embrace, repeatedly calling out, "Chow chow, chow chow, don't be angry, okay?" Why would I be angry? Arbor glanced at him and said in a mocking tone, "You people are born noble. How could you know how difficult life is? Compensation, compensation, compensation. The shattered dignity, the lost good times, could anything be compensated? What did they know about being locked up in a cellar where the sun couldn't shine on them?" Mo Lien's heart was beating wildly. He quickly hugged her and cried out, "Jojo, Jojo, you can't vent your anger on your husband. Your husband and I are on the same side. We are one. I will support you unconditionally. I will support you no matter what you do. Don't worry. In the future, if any of our relatives dare to step on my nose and do evil outside, no matter if they are uncles or aunts, this crown prince will not recognize them. You don't need to compromise on everything." Arbor impatiently threw away his hand. "You are the crown prince, you were born noble. Your mother is the empress and your father is the emperor." Chapter 54-38. You've never been locked up in a cellar before. It would be too much to ask you to understand how it felt. It's up to you whether to deal with it or not. You don't have to please me to make me happy. I'm not unhappy. Don't look for me about that woman in the future. I won't care. Your face is full of unhappiness. The more Mo Lien listened, the more flustered he became. She wasn't angry, she was furious. He thought about it and became more and more flustered. He could only use the stupidest method, which was to hold her tightly in his arms and kiss her. "I'll listen to you. Let that woman go up to the city tower tonight. Let everyone know that this woman only has herself to blame. She deserves to be punished." Arbor was annoyed by his tight embrace. She didn't manage to push his hand away twice. She glared at him. "You're sick." Mo Lien nodded repeatedly. As he nibbled on her, he whined pitifully, "Yes, I'm sick. I must take the antidote." Arbor rolled her eyes at him. She felt that her anger came out of nowhere. Jojo's lotus seemed a little unlucky and innocent. But it was probably the word cellar that triggered her nerves. Arbor thought, staying in that dark place all year round, hiding in a corner, having rats nibbling on her toes, she shuddered. Mo Lien immediately sensed it, and his arms tightened again, wrapping her tightly around him. "Don't be afraid, Jojo. Even if the sky falls and the earth shatters, I'll be by your side." Xiao Mu's heart softened when she saw that he was even more nervous than she was. A nameless fire came and left quickly, and she felt rather helpless as she looked at him. That was indeed the case. Why would she be angry at him for no reason? Jojo's lotus didn't know anything. How would she know that the word cellar could trigger her nerves? That night, the decree to strip the National Security Agency of his title came down. The National Security Agency's corpse was also hung up on the city tower. The crime of bullying the good and taking advantage of the good and handsome men was also clearly written down. Everyone spurned and cursed, and praised His Majesty and the Empress for being wise, and for not bending the law for favoritism. When the news reached the old king of Jianping's ears, the old man's body trembled. He immediately gave himself a thumbs up in his heart. When he heard the crown prince's words of not recognizing even his own family, from the servants, he immediately discussed with his son for an entire night and decided to continue to close the doors and decline visitors. At this time, one must not provoke the crown prince. Who knew who would be the next unlucky one? See, the National Security Agency is in big trouble now. It was still their King Jianping's mansion that was wise. Long before the new year, they had closed their doors and refused to receive guests, squatting at home to count mushrooms. If he didn't see anyone, there wouldn't be any trouble, and he wouldn't be scolded by the crown prince and his wife. Wise, too wise. Look at what happened to the National Security Agency, and then look at himself. The old king of Jianping silently ordered his men to continue to close the door tightly. He wrote a memorial to be presented to the great emperor the next day, and once again asked for an illness to recuperate at home for a month. When the great emperor received the booklet from his old brother, he was so angry that he laughed. He didn't expect that this cowardly brother of his really had some foresight. When the crown prince's uncles, 7 aunts and 8 aunts heard the news and received the first-hand information, other than Prince Kong who laughed until he slapped his thigh, everyone else silently held a family meeting. They repeatedly warned the younger generation in the family not to court death. If they court death on the crown princess's head, they would really die. For 3 days in a row, the empress sent the head palace maid, Pearl, to deliver snacks to the young crown princess. Chapter 54-39. Only when she received her daughter-in-law's return gift 3 days later did she silently heave a sigh of relief. She turned around and angrily scolded the emperor. Next time, don't make me go and find out what's going on. Look at what you've done. I already said, how can I touch the national security? It's not like I have nothing better to do. That day, I brought my daughter-in-law to destroy Zhaoguang's base. Are you stupid? You're always so suspicious, thinking that the young couple went to assassinate the national security. You even insisted that they go to the national security residence. If they didn't go, wouldn't it be fine? Look at how angry my father was. He went back to Glory City early this morning. Don't do it in the future. She had not been able to eat or sleep well for the past 3 days. The moment she closed her eyes, she would see her daughter-in-law looking at her coldly. She was afraid that her daughter-in-law would dislike her. Wouldn't she be wronged to death if that happened? The matter was caused by the emperor. The trouble was caused by the national security. What did it have to do with her? She was really wronged. She was on tenterhooks for several days and asked Pearl to plead for peace every day. Needless to say, when her daughter-in-law's expressionless face rose from the floor coldly, it made people's hearts in a mess. The emperor was angrily scolded by his daughter-in-law and vented all his anger on the courtiers. In the future, don't casually find trouble with the crown princess. If something happens, no one can save you. Don't blame me for not informing you in advance. I can't save you either. The aggrieved courtiers, Big Brother, none of us provoked her. Wasn't this recruited by the national security of your family? What's going on? Big Brother, you're the emperor. You have the final say. We know that you kowtowed to your daughter-in-law and were scolded by her. You're a pitiful man. We'll forgive you. Speaking of which, the courtiers had already seen the reality. Ever since General Zhongli's family was transferred out of the capital and left the national political stage alone, didn't everyone know that the crown princess was not to be trifled with? Who would provoke that little fiend for no reason? They had warned their madams and misses 800 years ago not to court death. No one can save you if you court death. It rained this morning, but the weather began to clear up in the afternoon. Jojo sat by the window with Dolly in his arms. He flipped through the book in his hand listlessly. Mo Lien ran all the way in and saw her son lying quietly in her wife's arms. There was a suspicious glint at the corner of his mouth. Mo Lien quickly ran over and hugged Arbor. He lowered his head and kissed her on the forehead. "Jojo, did you miss your husband?" The past 2 days had been worrying him to death. For some reason, Jojo did not like to talk much. It was as if he had returned to the way he was a few years ago. She would occasionally answer his questions, but most of the time, she would be in a daze. This feeling of not being able to blend in with him made him panic for no reason. After hurriedly finishing up the matters at hand, the first thing Mo Lien did was come back to see Qiao Qiao. Arbor looked up and glanced at her. "Your grandfather returned to the glorious city this morning." Mo Lien's heart skipped a beat. She quickly nodded beside her and said, "Yes, yes, yes." "What's wrong?" "Nothing. He's probably very angry with me," Arbor said lightly. "The old man is very angry about the national security incident." Mo Lien quickly sat up and took Arbor's little hand. She said softly, "Actually, the old man just can't swallow his pride. He's not angry with you." Chapter 54-40. After all, Madame Goen was considered a citizen of Glory City and was his adopted daughter. But now, she was hung on the city gate in such a disgraceful way and was despised by thousands of people. The old Gramps would definitely lose face, so what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over, so he might as well return to Glory City. Arbor sneered and didn't reply. Mo Lien's heart was beating like a drum. He knew that the little fella had something to say about his grandfather, but he kept it in his heart. Furthermore, the old Gramps and Jojo didn't get along well when they first met. Now, because of Goen's matter, there was a thorn in his heart. Mo Lien hurriedly pulled Arbor's hand and said softly, "Jojo, if you're unhappy in your heart, just tell your husband." Arbor glanced at him and stood up with the baby in his arms. He faintly said, "I'm not unhappy." Goen was already dead and his corpse had been whipped for 3 days. What else could he do if he wasn't happy? Grind his bones to dust? What use would that be? At this moment, a figure flashed at the door and a stiff little face appeared at the door. Li Ye's expression was meticulous as she said in a methodical manner, "Crown Princess, this subordinate has already sent the medicine over according to your instructions. A total of 13 people. 11 of them took the medicine and their condition improved. The other 2 subordinates had already breathed their last when they went over and couldn't be saved. So his wife had secretly sent Li Yi to send the medicine to save those who were rescued from the cellar." Mo Lien's heart thumped as he hurriedly looked at his wife's expression. However, he couldn't see anything from her ice, cold little face. There was no emotion or expression on his face. He just nodded indifferently. The Crown Prince now truly hated that damned Goen. So what if he died, but he still left such a terrible mess there? It even caused his wife to look at them differently. It was as if he and his mother, Goen's nephew and sister, had all become Goen's accomplices. "Jojo." Mo Lien hurriedly reached out to pull her. Arbor, however, turned away with an indifferent expression. Holding the baby in his arms, he pushed aside the bead curtain and walked in. "I'm tired. I want to take a nap." Her voice drifted into his ears. Mo Lien immediately felt unwell. He didn't dare to follow her in, so he could only pace back and forth outside the beaded curtain. Through the curtain, he stared anxiously at the figure inside, his tears almost falling. Jojo ignored him. After a while, Mo Lien heard the sound of porcelain falling to the ground from the inside. His heart immediately clenched tightly, and even his breathing stopped for a moment. "Jojo." Mo Lien couldn't care less about making her angry. She quickly lifted the curtain and ran into the room. The room was silent and Jojo was nowhere to be seen. Jojo. Mo Yen couldn't help but feel a little flustered. She quickly pinched the vine. Little ball. The vine didn't react at all. It seemed to have isolated him from the star field. Little ball. Mo Yen was furious and angrily called out. Little ball was rather helpless. It wasn't that it didn't want to drag the great crown prince into the star field, but right now, it couldn't do anything. The moment Master Silver entered the star field, the swaddling cloth wrapped around Little Ball suddenly flew into the air. God power surged in from all directions, shaking the entire star field until it became unstable. Arbor herself was a little dazed. She looked up at the sky in confusion. Right now, her body was fixed in place and she couldn't move at all. She could only stare in shock at baby Mo, who was floating in the air and waving its little arms and legs. Chapter 54-41. Wasn't her son's appearance too magical? Could it be that he was going to advance again? But wasn't his advancement speed a little too terrifying? He had only been born for a few days, and he was going to advance for the second time in a row. What kind of abnormal physique was this? Arbor had a puzzled expression on her face as she stared at her son, who was floating in the air without blinking. She could not make a sound for a long time. Chiu Chiu's earth-shattering voice suddenly rang in her ears, "Master Silver, Master Silver." Baby Mo was really a pervert. "Master Silver, I think our star domain seems to be transforming into the holy domain." Arbor blinked her eyes, thinking that she had heard wrongly. How was the holy domain possible? Wasn't the holy domain only able to transform into the holy domain when she broke through to the transcendent realm? Arbor's pupils suddenly constricted. Could it be that her son was going to break through to the transcendent realm? With such a fast advancement speed, would his small body succeed? Arbor looked at her son, who was floating in the air worriedly. "Chiu Chiu, can you stop him?" Arbor asked hurriedly. This child had completely inherited her cultivation from the moment he was born. On the day he was born, he had advanced to level 10 God tier with her. This kind of existence that violated the heavenly rules, no wonder the heavenly Tao would be so angry. And now, if he broke through to the transcendent realm at such a young age, she wondered if the heavenly Tao would throw this kid into the holy domain that the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal had mentioned in a fit of anger. It was said that the holy domain was far away from the Forgotten River. Without the heaven stairway, one could not go there on their own. The funniest thing was that it was said that the holy domain was a vast expanse of white. There was no food, no wine, nothing. Everyone in the holy domain should have broken through to the transcendent realm and been captured by the heavenly Tao to be centralized and cultivated. Therefore, when she summoned the venerable Peach Blossom Immortal from the holy domain, he stayed in her star domain and did not want to go back at all. Her son was still so young. What if he was teleported over by the crazy heavenly Tao? When Arbor thought of this, she could not help but shiver. "Stop him, Chiu Chiu. We can't let him advance to the transcendent realm now." "Master, Master." Chiu Chiu hurriedly comforted her. "Don't worry. As long as you don't advance to the transcendent realm, baby Mo won't be able to enter the transcendent realm for the time being. But I feel that the realm in my body is loosening. I'm about to break through." Arbor said expressionlessly. Ever since she gave birth to the baby, Jojo realized that no matter how much she wandered around, it seemed that as long as her son advanced in level, she would be able to benefit from it as well. It seemed that they would advance at the same time. She didn't want to be so lazy, but there was nothing she could do about it. Chiu Chiu hurriedly comforted her. "Don't worry, Master. Baby Mo had already advanced 2 levels previously. This time, he shouldn't be able to advance by much. It's probably just a small level. He won't be able to jump out of the range of a level 10 God tier." Xiao Mu involuntarily knitted her brows when she heard this. Why was she so unconcerned? Looking at the surging momentum in front of him and the speed at which the divine power flowed, it did not look like he had only advanced by a small level and could not jump 10 levels. Baby Mo's advancement was really earth-shattering. If it was outside, all the cultivators in the capital would have been alarmed by this time. Fortunately, they were on Fish Orchid Planet. Other than them, no one else saw it. Otherwise, if they saw such a small baby advancing to above level 10 of the God tier. Chapter 54-42. He wondered what everyone would think of this. At the very least, most people would not be able to accept such a terrifying reality. On the vast sea surface, the wind and clouds were surging, and divine power was swirling. From time to time, fish heads would pop out from the bottom of the sea, leaping up in a light silver arc. Such a huge commotion on the sea surface had already caused the entire Lan Sea to tremble. A huge land whale emerged from the depths of the sea, spitting saliva and looking at the sea surface with a pair of round eyes in astonishment. On an island, Holy Sun Mi Yen was playing chess with He Jichen. His fingers that were pinching the chess piece suddenly stopped in midair. Other than his eyeballs that could move slightly, he discovered that his entire body and limbs could not move at all. Holy Sun Mi Yen glanced at the man sitting in front of him. The fingers that Venerable Peach Blossom used to hold the teacup moved slightly, and he suddenly broke free from the restraint, letting out a long sigh of relief. That moment of delay made him feel as if his body was bound by the heavenly Tao, and he was almost unable to move. "Are you all right?" A certain Peach Blossom teased and looked at Holy Sun Mi Yen sitting opposite him, taking pleasure in his misfortune. Ayaya, what a strong restraining force. Even those below the divine venerable realm would be restrained. This fellow touched a sore spot and showed off in front of the immobile Holy Sun Mi Yen for a long time. Then he said, "Ayaya, I have to go see my Charl. I don't know what my Charl is doing. Look, why is this star field so turbulent?" As he spoke, the entire island rumbled, and the ground under his feet shook several times. Holy Sun Mi Yen gritted his teeth and stared gloomily at Venerable Peach Blossom who was walking back and forth. This fellow was really asking for a beating. He looked a bit more repulsive than that little bastard Mo Yen. A certain Peach Blossom sat on the stone table, folded his slender legs, and poked the black-faced Holy Sun Mi Yen. "I'm leaving. You stay here and be good. I won this game of chess." As he spoke, he deliberately used his black pieces to surround Mi Yan's white pieces. Then he tilted his head and looked at his masterpiece with great satisfaction. He won, and he won so beautifully, he. Holy Sun Mi Yen, seeing him disappear from the island in a flash, Mi Yen could not help but roll her eyes. He was 100 years old, but his IQ was 0 years old. He couldn't even compare to baby Mo who was just born a few days ago. He Chen's figure flashed, and when he appeared again, he was already standing beside Arbor. At this time, Xiao Mu was standing there motionlessly like a wooden puppet. When she saw Rotten Peach Blossom appear next to her, her eyes involuntarily shifted as she cast him a glance. "Aya, my Joe, you've been frozen. Are you tired? Do you want me to carry you to the side to sit for a while?" Arbor glared at him with her beautiful black eyes. Don't think that just because this fellow was laughing, she couldn't hear the gloating in his laughter. Reverend Peach Blossom pursed his lips. When he turned his head, he saw baby Mo, who was enveloped in a myriad of streams of divine power, in midair. Baby Mo was currently wrapped in a small cocoon that was overflowing with light. One could only vaguely see 2 tiny hands poking out of the swaddling clothes. These tiny hands made a circle in the air, and they were contrasted by the sparkling and translucent halo. Reverend Peach Blossom stared for a while, then frowned and said softly, "Jojo, is little Furball advancing again?" Was there really no problem with this child advancing so quickly? Arbor continued to glare at him. Chapter 54-43. Hu Jinshan lowered his head to look at himself, then glanced at the little stoic's indignant expression. He couldn't help but chuckle and say, "Don't worry, Jojo. He probably can't break free for a while. I reckon that after baby Mo completes his advancement, everyone will be able to move freely." Arbor naturally knew that everything would be fine after his son completed his advancement. She was just indignant. Humph, what right did a godly venerable realm cultivator have to stroll around outside? Right now, her star domain was slowly transforming into the holy domain. From the looks of it, it probably wouldn't be completed in a day or two. Didn't this mean that she would be stuck here like an idiot for several days and nights? This was simply preposterous. She was the omnipotent Jojo, the little master of the star domain. How could she be stuck here without being able to move? Sir Jojo struggled angrily, but he still couldn't break free of the binding force on him. She looked up and saw that the sea had regained its tranquility. The fish in the sea had all quieted down and didn't poke their heads out again. She couldn't help but feel a bit anxious. In her fit of anger just now, she carried the calligraphy treasure back to the star domain. Jojo's lotus was still pacing back and forth outside the palace. Her husband definitely couldn't enter the star domain now, so he was probably fretting and anxious. Who knew what kind of storm he would stir up? The little crown princess guess was right. The crown prince was already burning with anxiety and had nowhere to vent his irritable anger. He was practically about to flip the entire eastern palace upside down. For the past 3 days, the servants would make a detour whenever they saw the crown prince. No one dared to provoke the crown prince at this time. His Highness the Crown Prince was simply like a rampaging dragon these days. He disliked whoever he saw and attacked whoever he saw without exception. His Highness even had the underworld court guards investigate the family affairs of all his uncles, brothers, and aunts. After a round of investigation, he discovered that the second cousin of the Duke of Eternal Peace's concubine's brother was also an unruly person. 2 years ago, he snatched a farmer's daughter and almost caused her death. The great crown prince finally found a way to vent his bellyful of anger. Not only did he call the crown prince of the Eternal Peace Duke Missouri Lu, he even ordered him to hand over the second cousin of the Eternal Peace Duke's concubine's brother to be dealt with within 3 days. This was simply too much. As a result, the entire imperial family was in a state of panic. The crown prince of the Eternal Peace Duke was innocent. Mo Lu returned home in tears with a dumbfounded look on his face, complaining to his father, the Duke of Eternal Peace. Who knew that he would be involved in such a shocking matter? The second cousin of the Duke of Eternal Peace's concubine's brother, this Mo Lu, was really a relative that was completely unrelated to him. If the crown prince was looking for the second cousin of his concubine's brother, then he could still accept it. In the end, the crown prince went to look for Mo Lu's father, the second cousin of the Duke of Eternal Peace's concubine's brother. The crown prince was too embarrassed to call his royal uncle over and reprimand him, so he vented his anger on his own brother. This is really too much. Mo Lu was depressed for 2 whole days. After going around in circles a few times, he finally dragged out that scourge of a second cousin brother and helped the crown prince vent his anger. This matter immediately aroused the vigilance of everyone both inside and outside the court. Especially the imperial family and the relatives of the imperial family. Everyone began to investigate in a low-key manner, looking at everyone around them, including the aunts and aunts, to see if there was anyone unruly. Everyone knew that when the crown prince disregarded all his relatives, he would have no uncles, aunts, or uncles. Chapter 54-44. A distant relative of the Eternal Peace royal family had kidnapped a woman and treated human life like grass, causing the Crown Prince of Eternal Peace to be fined 6 months of his salary. The great emperor even went to look for the Eternal Peace royal family and secretly reprimanded him, throwing the title of being ignorant of people onto the Eternal Peace royal family's head. The Eternal Peace royal family was so angry that when he returned home, he immediately investigated all of his distant relatives. His face was ashen, and he was unable to calm down for half a month. It was too fucking sullen. Who knew that a concubine's family, a distant relative, would be dug out by the crown prince and punished? How angry must the crown prince have been these past few days for him to do such a heinous thing? Arbor's days in the star field were not easy either. Rotten Peach Blossom kindly carried her to a peach tree and even got her a stool to sit on, improving her upright posture. It took the outside world 5 days to transform the star field into the saint field. The people and beasts in the star field were complaining incessantly in their hearts. Other than the hierarch realm, all the people and beasts were bound by the power of the star field and could not move. The anxious and frustrated mood at the beginning, after dozens of hours, everyone had no choice but to collectively accept their fate. They temporarily accepted the fact that they could not move, and could only calm their minds and silently cultivate. Rotten Peach Blossom pitied his Jojo, who did not eat or drink, so he came over to feed him every few days. Most of the time, he was in a daze beside Jojo. Until 5 days later Mo Lien suddenly heard Qiuqiu's voice, and her expression changed slightly. At that time, he was angrily reprimanding a trembling official in the study when he suddenly stood up and asked the other party to leave. The unlucky official's legs were trembling, and he did not even know how he left the study. As soon as he left, he could not help but wipe his tears and go back gloomily. The moment Mo Lien stepped into the star field, she felt an indescribable sense of wonder. The aura in the entire star field was very fresh. The paradise planet in front of him seemed to have taken on a completely new look. It was full of vitality and prosperity. This change made everyone's eyes light up, and they felt indescribably happy. Crown Prince Mo's gloominess over the past few days was instantly swept away when he saw his wife meditating with her eyes closed under a peach tree. He quickly walked forward, but before he could reach his wife, he saw something fall from the sky. Mo Lien instinctively reached out to take it. She lowered her head and happened to meet baby Mo's eyes. The little guy was wrapped in a dirty blanket. His phoenix eyes were slightly bright as he stared at him with great vigor. "What are you glaring at?" Crown Prince Mo glared back at him as a matter of course. Rotten Peach Blossom's cold laughter came from the side. "Yo, you finally came in. Quick, take a look and see if there are any changes to Paradise Planet." Naturally, the changes were great. For example, the peach tree in front of him had grown thicker and stronger. The mountain range in the distance seemed to have been repainted with thick ink and heavy colors. It was so exuberant that it left one speechless. Vitality. The entire star field was full of vitality, as if someone had injected a trace of fresh life into it. The mountains and rivers in front of them had been reborn. The god domain has changed to the saint domain. Mo Lien sighed in relief. For the past few days, he had been restless, unable to eat or sleep. He had thought that Jojo did not want to talk to him, so he excluded him from the star field. Chapter 54-45. From the looks of it now, it was probably due to the sudden transformation of the star domain into the saint domain that caused him to be unable to enter for the past few days. Jojo probably didn't even have time to react before the divine domain began to transform, and she couldn't contact him anymore. Thinking of this, Mo Lien couldn't help but calm down a little. He had been on tenterhooks for many days, and he really couldn't eat or sleep well. His wife suddenly disappeared with the baby. It was really a scary thing. "Hey, do you want me to tell you? Why is this star domain transforming?" Venerable Peach Blossom flashed in front of him with a smile, revealing an expression of watching a good show as he looked him up and down. His voice was filled with schadenfreude. "Yo, Your Highness the Crown Prince hasn't slept well these past few days." Looking at this haggard little face, it really made one's mood happy. Mo Lien glanced at him. "Heh. I can't sleep well outside, but do you think you can sleep well inside?" Looking at this guy, it was obvious that he hadn't slept for a long time. His eyes were about to have dark circles. Did he think that no one could see it? Heh heh. Venerable Peach Blossom blinked his eyes. Seeing him float past him with Mo Bao in his arms, he couldn't help but snort. He really hadn't slept much during this period. If he wasn't staring at Jojo, he had to keep an eye on Mo Bao, that little ancestor. He was afraid that something would happen to the mother and son if they advanced too quickly. In the end, everything went smoothly. Mo Bao and his mother successfully reached the peak of level 12 of the divine domain. Just as they were about to break through to level 13, they stopped. Venerable Peach Blossom was already used to being provoked by Mo Bao. When he saw his realm soar, he just calmly glanced at him. The child's father had a calm expression on his face. Although he could sense that the child's realm had increased a lot as soon as he caught him, the child's father didn't say anything. They just looked at each other silently and glared at each other. Mo Bao spat out a mouthful of bubbles at his father with a look of disdain. His pair of phoenix eyes were dark, and the expression on his cute little face was wooden. On the other side, Arbor exited his cultivation state and found that he could move his hands and feet. Just as he was about to stand up, he heard Chiu-Chiu's noises from his conscious. Master, 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 master. You and baby Mo have both reached the pinnacle of level 12 god tier. Arbor's small face was expressionless. Didn't you say that Mo Bao, this child, would only advance in a small area at most, and wouldn't be able to jump out of the 10th level? How much of a scammer are you? That was why he could say such irresponsible words earlier. If it wasn't for Rotten Peach Blossom suppressing him, baby Mo would have probably become a level 13 god tier master without any hindrance. This speed of advancement was clearly much faster than his mother, his father, and anyone else in this world. As for his mother, Jojo, she had borrowed her son's power to rapidly advance in rank more than once. Who would believe it? She didn't want to advance in rank so hastily, but her son's advancement was like picking up a cabbage. It was so fast that even Charles didn't want to look at it. Most importantly, if his son had advanced, then so be it. Why did he have to tell the Heavenly Tao that Jean City was a saint? Even the Heavenly Tao wouldn't believe it. This child was really too talented, Lord Jojo thought to herself. Chiu-Chiu continued to make a ruckus. Master Silver, Chiu-Chiu originally thought that since little Master Silver had just advanced a few days ago, logically speaking, it was indeed impossible for him to advance so quickly again. Chapter 54-46. Moreover, Master hasn't had any fortuitous encounters and hasn't been cultivating properly. Reality has proven that everything in this world really doesn't make sense. Little Master's abnormality may be several times higher than yours, Master. Arbor, why did these words sound so awkward? Alright, stop spouting nonsense. Xiao Mu grumpily rebuked Chiu-Chiu. Can you sense how the little dumpling's body is doing? Very good. Chiu-Chiu hurriedly said, Master, you don't have to worry. Little Master's body has already entered the range of the immortal bone. Arbor, pretend she didn't ask. Master, Chiu-Chiu has another peerless piece of good news for you. Arbor was expressionless as she coldly responded with an "oh" in her conscious. The sapling immediately couldn't take it anymore and jumped up and down, shouting, Master, your attitude isn't right. Master. Chiu-Chiu said he has a peerless piece of good news for you, you should at least show some excitement. Look at you now, you're actually completely indifferent after hearing such good news. Master, what exactly are you thinking, Master? Hurry up and say it, Arbor snapped back. If you don't say it, I'm leaving my conscious right now. Now, she could see a little treant standing on the luxuriant sacred tree in her Dantian star region, waving its branches and branches as it smiled brightly at her. That silly look was simply unbearable to look at. Arbor looked at it speechlessly. Are you going to say it or not? The sapling angrily waved its branches. Master, I was just about to say it, don't interrupt. Arbor was so angry that she laughed. Without waiting for her to shout, Chiu-Chiu hurriedly said, Master, I actually have two pieces of news for you. One is a peerless piece of good news. The other isn't so good. Which one do you want to hear first? This noisy and troublesome tree was long-winded and liked to keep her in suspense. Arbor simply reached out and pulled it out of the star region, lifting it onto her palm. She opened her eyes and stared coldly at the little tree in her palm. In the blink of an eye, Jojo seemed to see stars flickering in and out of her tranquil and boundless eyes. Jojo's heart could not help but skip a beat. The moment he opened his mouth, he could not help but stutter, "Master, Master, are you about to break through to the transcendent God realm?" Masta's eyes seemed to contain the power of thousands of stars, as if she was about to break through to the saint level. Arbor glanced at him and said calmly, "Not so fast. How could it be so easy to break through to the transcendent God realm?" The little tree only knew how to make wild guesses. "Tell me your good news and bad news," Arbor said faintly, not noticing the two men standing not far from the mahogany tree and looking at her. She was curious and focused all her attention on the tiny tray ant in her hand. "What are you waiting for?" The little tray ant hurriedly nodded and stammered, "Master. Let me tell you the good news first. The good news is that I have another bone-forging pill of a higher grade. This time, you can turn your newly entered god bone into a saint bone in one go. If it was a saint bone, then no one below the holy venerable realm would be able to hurt little Masta." Arbor raised her eyebrows in surprise and thought for a while before nodding. "What kind of price do I have to pay?" Xiao Xiao was very clear that little tree, this deceitful fellow, had first strongly promoted the benefits to her. "I'm so sleepy. I'll make up for it tomorrow." Chapter 54-47. In order to obtain a powerful ability, one had to pay a corresponding price. Seeing her calm expression, the little Trent's heart trembled and it hurriedly explained the rest of its words. "Yes, it does hurt a little. And, in the initial stages, it will be a little miserable." Arbor raised her eyebrows and waited for this fellow to continue. The little tray ant continued to blabber. It's that, to obtain a new divine bone, you have to reforge all your bones." Before forging, the little tree's face was full of guilt, and its voice became lower and lower. It's best if your whole body coughs, your bones are cracked. Break all your bones, and then get a new life. Ha, yes, it does hurt a little. You may not be able to move in the short term. But Master, if you can endure this pain, after taking that saint-level bone-forging pill, you will be able to endure it. In the future, it will be hard for you to find a match below the divine venerate level. Just as the little tree finished speaking, it realized that the little Masta in front of it seemed to be off all over. Jojo's head was covered in cold sweat, and her gaze was a little dazed. It seemed that her body was actually trembling slightly. The little tray ant was a little panicked and hurriedly waved its hands. Masta, don't panic. Don't be afraid. If you don't want to eat this bone-forging pill, we won't eat it." The moment it finished speaking, it felt its little body being sent flying by a punch. Ouch! It cried out in shock as it was thrown in an arc in mid-air and was instantly thrown far away. Mo Lien strode forward and hugged Arbor in his arms. He lowered his head and looked at her worriedly. He patted her back lightly and said in a low voice, Jojo. Don't be afraid, don't listen to the little tree's nonsense. We won't eat that pill." Arbor came back to her senses and realized that she was covered in cold sweat. She was instantly depressed. She couldn't help but clench her fists tightly and pursed her lips, not saying anything for a long time. He didn't expect that after so long, his mental fortitude was still so weak. Just hearing the sapling talking about breaking all the bones in her body made her think of the days when all her limbs were broken and she crawled around like a pitiful little worm. He broke out in a cold sweat for no reason. This terrifying psychological illness had never been cured, but she had ruthlessly buried it in the darkest corner of her heart. Occasionally, after tearing it open, he would still feel a bone-piercing pain. Holding the expressionless baby Mo in his arms, Venerable Peach Blossom stepped forward and urged with a frown, Mo Yen, help her up and sit over there. Mo Yen helped her up and walked to the stone table at the side to sit down. He stroked her sweaty forehead and said softly, Jojo, don't panic. It's okay. Don't listen to the little tree's nonsense, just ignore it. He-chan nodded. Suddenly, he felt the little ancestor in his arms move. He looked down and saw the little child leaping into the air and floating in front of his mother. Then, he suddenly fell down. Mo Yen moved his body slightly to the side, and the little child landed between the two of them, obediently lying on Arbor's lap. Arbor reached out to touch his little hand instinctively. She blinked and pulled the blanket off her son's body in disdain. She scolded her husband as usual. Your son is so dirty. The blanket is so dirty. Don't you know how to change it for him? Mo Yen looked at his wife pitifully. Chapter 54-48. Wife, please be reasonable. I've only seen my son for a few minutes, and he looks so dirty. Is it because of me? Arbor glared at him in annoyance. Hurry and change. Hu Shichen nodded in agreement and did not hesitate to add insult to injury. That's right. You don't know how to be a father at all. Mo Yen pitifully reached out to take the dirty calligraphy. Couldn't her son be a normal baby? He could make himself look so dirty just by staying in the star domain. Who knew what he had been doing all this time? His fingers had just touched the little ancestor's swaddling clothes. Who would have thought that a fair hand would reach out from the side and slap his hand away? Look at how clumsy you are. Let me do it. Hu Shichen glanced at him and reached out to pick up the expressionless baby Mo. She turned to leave with a smile. To their surprise, as soon as they turned around, they saw Holy Sun Mi Yen standing not far behind them. His tattered clothes were full of holes, and he was staring at them with resentment in his small eyes. Hu Shichen chuckled and said, "Oh, damn. Where did this big beggar come from? All right. Let's go. I'm in a good mood today. I'll help you change your clothes too." Baby Mo waved his little hand unhappily. Hu Shichen smiled and held him back. All right, little dumpling. Just take it that you're pitying your father. Your father has been on tenterhooks outside these days. He can't eat or sleep well. It's really tragic. Most importantly, Jojo's mood really needed someone to comfort him. Mo Yen looked up and held Arbor's hand. She said softly, "Jojo, are you feeling better now?" Arbor had already adjusted himself. It was mainly because Chio's suggestion just now caught her off guard and scared her. Thinking about it again, was she really that weak? Of course not. The past was the past. The present was the present. That bone-forging pill did indeed make her recall the difficult times of the past. However, those were all in the past. If she wanted to further refine her body, she might consider the bone-forging pill. However, it seemed that as long as she thought about the pain of having her bones broken, her body would still tremble uncontrollably. Mo Yen held her hand tightly and sat close to her. She looked down at her and said, "Jojo. Don't think about the past." Arbor shook his head and looked up at him with a determined gaze. The harder it is, the more you have to overcome it. I shouldn't let the fear in my subconscious grasp me. Only by resolutely overcoming it could he break through the last demonic barrier in his heart. Mo Yen couldn't help but be startled. She sighed softly and said, "All right, whatever you want to do, I will support you. I will always accompany you and help you." The little stoic clearly didn't need to be so difficult. Now, she clearly had everything she needed. Her star domain had also transformed into a saint domain. She didn't lack anything in her saint domain. In fact, she didn't need to work hard at all. However, Jojo said that the more difficult it was, the more they had to overcome it. Mo Lian's heart was filled with emotion. Jojo. He reached out and gently stroked her hair. Don't be angry with me anymore, alright? These few days were truly too unbearable. Especially after Jojo returned to the star domain without a word and didn't come out again. The Crown Prince felt that the sky was really about to collapse. Arbor also felt a bit embarrassed. That day, she only wanted to return to the star domain to calm down a little. She didn't expect the little dumpling to be so deceptive. Chapter 54-49. Now that she thought about it, she indeed shouldn't have made Jojo's lotus worry for so long for no reason. When she thought of this, the little stoic couldn't resist raising her hand to stroke her husband's slightly haggard handsome face. Actually, I'm not angry at you. It was just that when she thought of the National Security Agency's actions, she felt a little angry, but actually, the National Security Agency's matter really had nothing to do with the Crown Prince. The two of them didn't have a good relationship, and to be honest, they had fallen out more than once. If she took her anger out on Jojo's lotus because of the National Security Agency's matter, Jojo would feel wrong just by thinking about it. When Mo Lian saw that her expression had eased, the huge rock that had been weighing on his heart finally settled down steadily. He hastily pulled her into his embrace and lowered his head to rub against her head. Jojo, don't ignore me when you're angry in the future, okay? Arbor couldn't resist rolling her eyes at him. Who could maintain a good mood when they were angry? Don't worry, something like the National Security Agency won't happen again in the future, Mo Lian said to her with certainty. When you weren't around, I fiercely taught everyone around me a lesson. I guarantee that they won't dare to make the same mistake again for the next 8 to 10 years. Arbor blinked her eyes. She seemed to have picked up on something from Jojo's lotus's words. It seemed like everyone around Jojo's lotus didn't have a good time when she wasn't around. Was she imagining things, or was this the truth? What did you do? Arbor couldn't help but ask curiously. Jojo's lotus should be quite anxious recently, and the people around him probably didn't have a good time either. When Arbor thought of this, she couldn't conceal her curiosity and pretended to ask nonchalantly, Jojo's lotus, could it be that you laid your hands on your uncles and brothers? Laid my hands on what? Mo Lian shook his head calmly and said, how could that be? I was very polite to them. It's just that something happened to Moyo's family, so I punished him according to the nation's laws and family rules. He is very grateful to me. Xiao Mu blinked, only feeling that this sentence sounded awkward no matter how she heard it. He felt that after he dealt with Brother Mo and Brother Lu, they were quite grateful to him. Mo Lian saw the look of disbelief on her face and hurriedly said, it's true. His distant cousin was found out by me and I punished him to teach his family a lesson. Naturally, he will be grateful to me. Their whole family will remember my kindness. Is that so? Arbor silently glanced at his husband and suppressed the smile on his lips. Wasn't her husband venting his anger on her? It was a pity that Mo Lu's family was mercilessly insulted by the Crown Prince. However, it was their family's bad luck. If they hadn't done anything wrong, they wouldn't have been scolded. Arbor snorted and threw the matter of the Mo Lu family to the back of his mind. Grasping his palm with her small hand, Xiao Mu looked at him and said, Xiao's Lian, I was in the wrong this time. I shouldn't have taken my anger out on you about the national security incident, and I shouldn't have returned to the Star region without saying goodbye. It's just that after that, the Star region's sudden advancement was actually your son's fault. This has nothing to do with me. When it came to the ability to shift the blame, if Jojo claimed to be second, no one would dare to claim to be first. This guy didn't hesitate to shift the blame to his son. His conscience didn't hurt at all. Looking at her little mouth smacking, saying how his son had tricked him and how he had started advancing the moment he entered the Star region. Chapter 54-50. So what if he was promoted? Why did he have to make her unable to move? What a joke. Mo Lien couldn't help chuckling as he looked at her. He pulled her into his embrace and lightly bit her small mouth. Xiao Xiao, you're the one who screws me over the most. Arbor was unhappy when she heard that. She glared at him. How am I a trickster? How am I a trickster? She wasn't a trickster. She was a good person. It was Mo Lien, this fellow, who was the biggest fraud. Your son has inherited your trickery. Arbor pursed her lips. Don't call him a trickster. He's just inheriting your fine tradition. The student has surpassed the master. He'll definitely be trickier than you in the future. Mo Lien laughed. The haze of the past few days was swept away. The next day, Kai Xiu and Kai Chi realized that the little crown princess had finally returned to the Eastern Palace. The two of them cried tears of joy. They decorated themselves with lanterns and banners and told the good news to all the palace maids and eunuchs in the Eastern Palace. The haze that had shrouded the Eastern Palace for the past few days was finally dispelled and the sun could be seen. Everyone was in high spirits, as if they were celebrating the new year. People were in high spirits. Arbor couldn't understand why these people were so happy. She continued to live her life as usual. In her spare time, she would draw talismans, refine pills, and cultivate with her son. That's right, the little guy had an extremely high passion for cultivation. His positive attitude was simply breathtaking. Master Jojo always tried to attract his son's attention with things that babies liked, but it didn't work very well. One day, Jojo opened her eyes and realized that her husband wasn't by her side. She looked up. The sun was bright and clear. It was probably past 7 in the morning. Her husband had already gone to court. She sat up and flipped the blanket. She couldn't find any trace of her son. She asked Little Tree Ball, "Where's Little Furball?" Little Furball went to Fish Orchid Planet to absorb sacred power. Master Jojo's expression became strange. Why did he feel that such a small child like Xiao Tuanzi seemed to have an excessive desire for supreme cultivation? He couldn't be thinking of advancing again, right? If this went on, how could he endure it? Would others still be able to live? Don't tell me you're thinking of breaking through to the transcendent realm before you're a month old. Master, Little Furball has gone to Peach Blossom Slope. Do you want to come and take a look? Chio's voice suddenly became excited. Peach Blossom Slope. Arbor froze for a moment, then quickly jumped off the bed. She lowered her head and looked at her own disheveled appearance. She hurriedly ran to wash up and put on her clothes. I'll be right there. What is Xiao Tuanzi doing? Master Silver, come quickly, come quickly. Chio's excited voice immediately flew up, its tone filled with disbelief. You definitely can't imagine it. Arbor was shocked, and even his voice trembled slightly. Don't tell me you're really planning to break through the transcendent realm. She did not approve of the little fellow's rapid progress. So fast, can this small body withstand it? Arbor entered Paradise Planet in fear and trepidation, quickly moving in the direction of the airflow. In an instant, her figure appeared on the Peach Blossom Slope. However, the strange thing was that Arbor did not see her son at first glance. Instead, she saw the back of a figure in a green and blue silk robe standing on the peak of the Peach Blossom Slope not far away. Under the blooming peach plant, a few naughty pink petals landed on that person's long hair that was draped over her waist. Chapter 54-51. When she saw this familiar figure, her heart couldn't stop pounding madly. The little stoic thought she was seeing things and hastily rubbed her eyes. Chio rolled to her side at some point and excitedly exclaimed, Master, Xiao Tuanzi is truly too amazing. You don't know, but when he leaped into the air just now, he gathered more than half of Fish Orchid Planet's sacred energy and then, Arbor couldn't hear Chio's blabbering anymore. Right now, she only had that familiar figure in her eyes, and her breathing couldn't help but stop. That person seemed to have realized something and abruptly turned around. She was holding a small swaddle in her arms and looked at her with a gentle gaze. A gentle smile slid across her exquisite features. His entire person was like a lively scroll painting, suddenly leaping into her eyes. Just like several years ago, that person leaned against the window and slowly turned around, her eyes extremely enchanting and charming. Just like back then, she tilted her head and waved her hand at her with a grin. "Disciple, Master has come to disturb you." Nothing had changed. Everything seemed to be the same as before. Arbor stood there in a daze, unable to say anything for a long time. Until Murong Sun tilted her head and smiled at her. Murong Sun held the baby in one hand and spread out her other hand as she said to her with a grin, "Aya, disciple, long time no see. I didn't expect you to be married and have a child already." When Master saw my little grand-disciple's stoic face, my intuition told me it was your baby, ha 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 ha. You still have the cheek to laugh at you. Arbor fiercely glared at her before dashing over and crashing into her arms. "Murong Sun, you damn liar. Unfilial disciple." Peak Master Murong pursed her lips and tapped her youngest disciple's head, her eyes sparkling. "Don't you know how to say something nice to make Master happy?" Arbor hugged her back and grumbled, "Damn liar, you missed the coming-of-age ceremony and also the wedding. Now, you can only attend my child's 1-month-old celebration." Murong Sun beamed with joy and hugged Arbor with one hand. "Excellent, excellent. Master will definitely attend my little grand-disciple's 1-month-old celebration." She patted Arbor's head with a smile and murmured, "Disciple, Master has troubled you endlessly these years. It's been hard on you." Murong Sun couldn't be clearer about her situation back then. He was originally a dead man who couldn't be more dead. Why was he standing here now? How could the dangers and difficulties of this be covered in just a few words? Her youngest disciple must have traveled thousands of miles and went through endless hardships to save her. Master Murong Sun's head, Murong Sun's SST Murong STSS Lil, unfilial disciple. Her master had just woken up, yet she was beating and scolding her. She even called her a damn liar. She was simply a little bastard. Xiao Mu sniffed. "I wasn't the one who saved you in the beginning. It was that guy Yunfei. However, it's also because of him that good things are strewn with setbacks. It's a long story, so I'll have Mo Lien tell you when we have time." Peak Master Murong glared at the back of her disciple's head and felt a bit irritated. This unfilial disciple still looked like she was on the verge of death after saying more than 3 sentences. "Master." Arbor turned around and clenched her fists. "Your cultivation." Murong Sun spread her hands and looked at herself. Chapter 54-52. She shook her arm and used her original spiritual energy, but she was unperturbed after discovering nothing. She lowered her head and met baby Mo's eyes before giggling mischievously at the stoic child. The other party's 2 black eyes were unmoving and fixated on her like this, making her inexplicably feel that her smile just now seemed a bit stupid. Why didn't this grand disciple learn anything else and copy his mother's stoic face? Children should be cute and adorable when their heads are round. Don't learn from your mother and pull a long face all the time. "Master." Arbor turned around and angrily called out. She was talking to her about serious matters, but this fool started to be mischievous again. Murong Sun responded and walked up. She reached out to stroke Arbor's head. "Disciple, what are you thinking about? You can't be thinking that Master will blame you for losing her cultivation, right? Look, Master is someone who has lived a new life, so what is there that I can't accept?" Murong Sun peered at her little disciple standing in front of her, her gaze landing on that unchanging stoic face, and her hands involuntarily itched. She reached over and pinched her disciple. "You're not cute at all. Hurry and stop pulling a long face. Your master, walked around the gates of hell and came back, so why don't you show me a smile?" Arbor glared at her several times and brusquely slapped her hand away. I'm talking to you about serious matters. Isn't it just the loss of your cultivation? Murong Sun waved her hand nonchalantly. You can cultivate again if it's gone. Think about how your master, me, is a stunningly talented person, so how could I be defeated by a trifling obstacle in front of me? Arbor felt that peak Master Murong, who used to be so stunning and peerless, might not be able to withstand the blow of becoming a cripple. She hastily strode forward and nodded, an extremely serious expression appearing on her stoic face. Master, your foundation is still there. I have a bloodshed vermilion fruit here, so eat it. Perhaps you can comprehend a spiritual root again. Okay. Disciple, don't worry about this for now. Master has something to talk to you about. Murong Sun pulled her little disciple's hand and earnestly said as they walked, Disciple, do you know how Master woke up? Master woke up when my star domain transformed into the holy domain. No. Murong Sun shook her head at her. When I opened my eyes, I saw my grand disciple in front of me. I think this little fellow kissed me. When Murong Sun saw her little disciple looking at her strangely, she coughed lightly and hastily said, I'm saying that this little fellow might be an apothecary. At that time, I felt a mouthful of medicinal power enter my mouth. Xiaomu abruptly widened her eyes and abruptly lowered her head to look at her son, who was expressionlessly looking at them in Murong Sun's arms. Master, Murong Sun, Master, Murong, Master, Murong Master, Murong. When Murong Sun returned to her senses, she discovered that her little disciple had snatched her grand disciple away in a fluster. Her lips twitched uncontrollably, and she watched as her little disciple disappeared in front of her with the child in her arms. Her noisy shouts still lingered in the air. Mo Lien. Oh no, your son has inherited your apothecary skills. Hurry and come back to block the lightning. Heavenly law definitely would not let this heaven-defying child go, so it was time for the child's father to perform. Murong Sun was dumbfounded. Chapter 54-53. She truly couldn't understand what her disciple meant by calling the crown prince back to block the lightning. Why did he change so much these days when she wasn't around? She simply couldn't keep up with her little disciple's jumpy train of thought. She strolled around the vicinity and couldn't help but click her tongue in wonder. When she picked up a disciple in Shijiao City back then, she had long known that he was a little nouveau riche. Seeing him today, she couldn't help but feel that her knowledge of her disciple back then was still too shallow. Arbor hopped out to look for her husband with her ink treasure in her arms, but she couldn't find him after looking around. Instead, that anxious roar called Saichi and Kai Xiu over. When they saw her anxious appearance, they hastily went up and said, Crown Princess, did you forget? Today, His Highness the Crown Prince said that he will go to the Ministry of Justice's dungeon to interrogate City Lord Mu and his disciple, Gui Xuan, after court. He reckons that he won't be back until later. Xiao Mu patted her small head lightly. It seemed like her husband had mentioned it to her yesterday. However, she was in a daze at that time, so how could she have thought about it so much? She looked amiably at Saichi and Kai Xiu. Then you two go busy yourselves. It was truly regretful that her husband wasn't in the Eastern Palace, so she couldn't find him to block the lightning for her son. She lowered her head to glance at the expressionless baby Mo and couldn't resist curling her lips at him. The latter's beady black eyes stared straight at her with sparkling eyes. His little appearance was so adorable that it melted her heart. When Arbor recalled how her husband disdained her son for being ugly yesterday, she couldn't resist pursing her small lips. How was her little baby ugly? He truly had no taste. He was so beautiful and adorable. When he grew up, he would definitely be the most beautiful baby in the world. Son, don't disappoint me. The little stoic grasped her son's small paw and mumbled to him, in the future, you must grow prettier than daddy and mock him instead. The little fellow opened his mouth and yawned. The little stoic's eyes curved into crescents. Baby Mo was really adorable. She really wanted to poke him, but when she recalled how soft this child's entire body was, Sir Jojo restrained himself and withdrew his restless hand. When you grow up a little more, Mother will bring you out to gain experience. We will travel all over the 3 continents and the Sea of Forgetfulness. Arbor paced back and forth in the bedroom with his son in his arms for a while. Suddenly, he stopped and hurriedly flashed back into the star field. Just now, she had been so focused on finding her husband to block the lightning that she had thrown her master into the star domain. At this moment, he suddenly remembered and hurriedly ran in to look for his master. Master, master. The little stoic didn't find her master on Peach Blossom Slope, so she hastily used her divine perception to search the star domain. Finally, under a peach tree, she saw Murong Sun sleeping soundly while leaning against a tree branch. The little stoic jumped in fright and hastily walked over. She reflexively reached out to check if she was breathing. Who would have thought that Murong Sun would grab her hand before it could even touch her? He opened his eyes and grinned at her, his eyes sparkling. Aya, my little disciple, don't tell me you think that your master is lying here dead. Bah! Arbor wanted to spit on her face. Don't worry. Murong Sun stretched and stood up. She raised her hand to pat the little stoic's head. I promise to let you take care of me for the rest of my life. Master definitely won't go back on her word. The little stoic's eyes reddened, and she glared at her several times, both annoyed and amused. This master of hers had never been proper. Every time she spoke, she would tease her. She didn't know which words were true and which were false. Chapter 54-54. Disciple, don't worry about Master. Although Master doesn't have any cultivation, Master can sense that Master's body has recovered quite well. Arbor nodded and took out 3 fruits of different sizes in one go, stuffing them all into Murong Sun's hands. Master, the flesh of the bloodshed vermilion fruit can improve one's constitution and prolong one's life. The biggest use of the core inside is to help people comprehend their spirit roots. Eat this first. Murong Sun lowered her head with a smile and glanced at the small fruit that glowed with a red light amidst the green color. She nodded repeatedly. Not only can the longevity fruit increase one's lifespan, but it can also rejuvenate one's youth and restore one's youthful appearance. It has the ability to retain one's youthful appearance. Arbor glanced at Murong Sun's unchanged appearance and pursed his lips. Master, you don't need to recover your appearance. Murong Sun was overjoyed when she heard this and touched her face before touching her little disciple's face. She laughed indecently and said, I didn't expect Master to have the ability to retain one's youthful appearance after sleeping for so long, ha 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 ha. As expected, it's hard to abandon one's natural beauty. Arbor, Master, can you be any more shameless? Murong Sun simply ignored her and stuffed another green fruit with a furry shell into her hands. This is a holy fruit. Take it, Master. She paused and suddenly asked dejectedly, does Master not have an inner world now? How is that possible? Murong Sun flicked her little head. What are you thinking about? Master's cultivation base has only dropped, it's not like I've lost all of my divine sense. Don't worry, with your Master's aptitude and ability, it won't take long even if I start learning from scratch and start from the mystic realm all the way up. After saying this, she accepted the 3 fruits with a smile and put them into her inner world before glancing at her little disciple with a chuckle. The little stoic's eyes brightened. Really, Master? Nonsense, why would Master lie to you? It's not the first time you've lied to me. Murong Sun rubbed her nose guiltily and earnestly said to the little stoic, good child, don't worry. Master won't lie to you in the future. Arbor's dejected mood slightly improved. Since Master could still use her inner world, it meant that at least she didn't start from scratch. If her divine sense was still intact, it should be relatively easy for her to slowly recover her cultivation in the future. Thinking of this, Arbor couldn't help but feel happy. Master. She tilted her head and said, did you know? I found a place with good feng shui in the Divine Province and built our holy water sect there. Do you want to go back and take a look? Murong Sun's fingers tightened, and she abruptly looked up at her youngest disciple, excitement in her voice. Really? Arbor nodded vigorously. Murong Sun hastily ran up to her and pulled her hand. Traitorous disciple, you're only telling Master about such an important matter now. Then what are we waiting for? Let's get going. Arbor couldn't help but laugh. He reached out and grabbed her. You just woke up. You need to recover well. Don't go anywhere for a while. Rest well and cultivate in our star field. As for second martial uncle and senior sister, don't worry. I've already sent them a message and told them to attend the 1-month-old celebration for the calligraphy treasure. They'll probably arrive in 2 days at the latest. Arbor's eyes brightened. Master, everyone will gather in Dragon Flame City very soon. She hadn't told second martial uncle and senior sister about her master waking up. Chapter 54-55. At that time, Jojo would definitely give them a huge fright and scare them into wailing in pain. Then the relationship is excellent, Murong Sun muttered to herself and nodded repeatedly, praising her for making good arrangements. Now that everyone has run to the capital, will the holy water sect's treasured feng shui land be snatched by others? What are you thinking, Master? The little stoic couldn't resist rolling her eyes at her. Even if someone wanted to barge into the sect, they would have to see if they could pass through the great array protecting the sect at the entrance, right? Moreover, even if they barged in, there would still be a huge surprise waiting for them afterward. It's fine, no treasured feng shui is more important than you guys. As long as the holy water sect was in good order, so what if the sect was robbed? At worst, they could seek revenge and fight back or change to a better treasured feng shui. Murong Sun nodded with a smile, her heart brimming with joy. How has your second Ant Master been recently? Not bad. Is she still dumb? Murong Sun asked while holding her little disciple's hand. Arbor, Master, how do you want me to answer your question? The little stoic thought about it and could only reply seriously, second Ant Master has grown up quite a bit. Murong Sun was startled, and all sorts of feelings involuntarily welled up in her heart. She was half sad and half moved. Even young Shirong, this dunce, had grown up. That's right. In that kind of situation, as the last senior in the Holy Water sect, she was forced to grow up and shoulder the heavy burden of the Holy Water sect, right? Master. The little stoic snuggled up to her and cautiously asked, You're not lying to me, right? What did Master lie to you about? Murong Sun really wanted to beat her up when she saw that deadpan stoic face so close to her. For example, although you woke up, your body's condition wasn't good, but you hid it from me. Murong Sun rolled her eyes. Or for example, you don't have long to live, but you weren't willing to tell me. For the rest of your life, you'll find a random excuse to leave and find a deserted island to spend the rest of your life alone. The little stoic stared at her master with bright eyes. Murong Sun dumbfoundedly glanced at her disciple and smacked her on the head. You darn child, is there anyone who curses their master like you? Let Master tell you, Master is fine. Don't even think about getting rid of me in the next 100 or 200 years. Wait for your master to gnaw on your bones and squeeze out your blood. Your master will definitely eat you until you're poor. The little stoic carefully studied her master's expression and discovered that she was magnanimous and didn't make any small movements of wanting to say something. She nodded her head in relief and wagged her little finger at her. Master, you have to be careful. If you lie to Jojo again, Jojo won't let you off. Murong Sun, why did this disciple of his seem a little perverted? She really wanted to ask her if she would let her go. If she really couldn't hold it in any longer and wanted to go down, could it be that this fellow would pull her out and give her a good beating? As soon as Murong Sun thought of this scene, she couldn't help but shudder and silently curse her traitorous disciple in her heart. Her little disciple was raised to be so obedient and adorable since she was young. Although she didn't like to talk, she was still filial. How did she become like this after a few years? This was definitely Crown Prince Mo's troublesome matter. She just knew that this black-hearted fellow couldn't teach a good child. Jojo married him so early and was imperceptibly influenced by this pervert. She really suffered a great loss. Chapter 54-56. On the way back to the palace, Prince Mo didn't know that Peak Master Murong had viciously scolded him in his mind again. If he knew, he would definitely be very stupefied. Prince Mo, whose status in the family was getting lower and lower, stumbled all the way back to the Eastern Palace. He didn't find his wife after searching everywhere, so he wanted to search in the Star Domain. Coincidentally, Jojo flashed out of the Star Domain and saw him foolishly take out a vine from his sleeve and call out to Chocho. The little stoic cracked her small mouth at him and quickly walked up with the baby, jumping into his arms. Jojo's Lien, how was the battle today? Speaking of going to the dungeon to refresh Mu Jinghong and Guishuan, Mo Lien couldn't help but snap out of her daze. I'm afraid we can't keep those two, Mo Lien said angrily. They didn't tell me half the truth and kept using lies to brush me off. I don't even have the patience to continue talking to them. Arbor nodded. Since you can't get anything out of them, don't go tomorrow either. However, Mo Lien was still a bit unwilling. He had to know the whereabouts of Chocho's last fragment in order to completely set his wife's mind at ease. Wife, don't worry. As long as Chocho's fragment is still near Dragon Flame City, your husband will find it even if he has to turn over every inch of this land. The little Treant was so moved that it sobbed behind them. Your Highness, I didn't expect you to treat Chocho so well. Normally, Chocho thinks you only know how to yell at Chocho, but I didn't expect your Highness to reveal your true feelings to Chocho at such a crucial time. Your Highness said to turn over every inch of land to find Chocho's fragment at all costs. Chocho was truly a bit moved. The Crown Prince, did Chocho misunderstand something? He wasn't doing it because he cared about his fragment. It was only because his wife longed for that fragment that he spared no effort to search for it. If Chocho had nothing to do with his wife, he wouldn't even bother to look at it as a synonym for black-bellied. The Crown Prince obviously would not correct the beautiful misunderstanding in Chocho's mind. He even reached out his hand full of emotions and stroked the little Trent's leafy head. Chocho, don't worry and leave it to me. I will definitely help you find the last fragment so that you can successfully fuse with it and restore the sacred wood completely. Okay. Chocho nodded gratefully, then turned to Arbor and said, Master, the Crown Prince is the best. Arbor glanced at the little Treant speechlessly. This guy was so gullible. No wonder he was bullied by Jojo's lotus every time. Master Silver. The little Treant jumped to Arbor's side and moved its thin branches. Arbor helplessly picked up his little body and glanced at his smiling husband. He couldn't help but criticize in his heart, little tree is also old but not wise. So stupid. 2 days later, Arbor received news early in the morning that the senior sisters from the Holy Water sect had arrived. She had already sent people to wait at the city gates of Dragon Flame City. She would receive the news firsthand no matter which city gate the Ant Masters and senior sisters entered. After receiving the news, Jojo stuffed her son into the Star Domain and cheerfully brought Saishio and Saichi to pick them up. Jojo missed her senior sisters very much after not seeing them for a long time. Jojo was happy when she thought about how her Ant Masters and senior sisters could stay in Dragon Flame City for a while. Her son's 1-month-old banquet was still more than 10 days away, so her sect members must be in a hurry to see her. Chapter 54-57. Otherwise, why would she come to reunite with her more than 10 days in advance? She must be thinking of Jojo. Arbor was very happy in her heart. She directly summoned the divine bird Qing Luan and flew straight to the city gate with Kai Chi and Kai Xiu. Along the way, she couldn't suppress her excited mood and chatted with Kai Xiu and Kai Chi. Today, let's make a rich and delicious meal. I'll give you some ingredients later. Take it to the kitchen and let the kitchen add more dishes. Kai Chi and Kai Xiu's eyes lit up when they heard this. The two of them had been with the crown princess for so long, so they naturally knew that the ingredients that the little crown princess took out were all rare and precious things that couldn't be sold on the market. Tonight, the two of them could also eat their fill, so they were very happy. The Qing Luan flew very quickly, and the journey was very smooth. When they arrived at the West City Gate, they saw an endless stream of people lining up to enter the city. There weren't many people leaving the city, only a few. Arbor saw the slender and delicate figure of senior sister Su Shanshan at a glance, and her eyes couldn't help but light up. But soon, she frowned, looking at the noisy scene below, and pursed her lips. The cry of the Qing Luan attracted the attention of many people at the city gate. Many people couldn't help but look up. A young child excitedly pointed at the Qing Luan in the air and shouted happily, "Big bird, it's a big bird." The child's mother hurriedly pulled her child back and reminded him, "Don't go, don't go." Such a big bird was like a god descending. The identity of the visitor was definitely not an ordinary person. If they accidentally bumped into such a noble person, then the lives of ordinary people like them wouldn't be enough to be chopped off even if they had 8 or 10 lives. After Arbor let the Qing Luan fly lower, she put it away and pulled Kai Xiu and Kai Chi to quickly land. She turned and looked at the place where the crowd was gathered. Senior sister Su Shanshan's group had their backs to them, as if they were arguing with someone else. The two city gate guards seemed to be in a dilemma. They looked at Su Shanshan and the others, and then looked at some other people. Arbor's gaze fell on the people who were quarreling with Su Shanshan. They were a group of young women, all wearing moon-white dresses and white veils inlaid with pearls. When Arbor saw these people with white veils, his eyes couldn't help but become stern. Why were there such fools everywhere? She remembered that the holy maiden of Zhaoguang was also good at wearing a white veil when she pretended to be pretentious. Oh right, they would also scatter rose petals along the way to create the scene of a fairy descending. Looking at it, he felt that it was pretentious and disgusting. Then she looked at the group of sisters from the Holy Water sect. Each of them was dressed in cyan robes with long sleeves, and their postures were upright and neat. Even little Canon Fong Su's loud voice sounded much more pleasing to the ears than that group of orioles and swallows. Xiao Mu's gaze swept around, but she didn't see any trace of second Ant Master. She was slightly curious and walked over in that direction. As they got closer, the noise became even louder. The two city guards said helplessly, "Ladies, why don't we go to the side and have a proper discussion? Look, the people behind us have been waiting in line for a long time. We can't keep blocking the way, right?" Su Shanshan laughed brightly. "Apologies, little brother. Then we will go to the side to talk." The guard hastily nodded with a smile. However, while Su Shanshan and the others were easy to talk to, those fairies didn't want to give up just like that. Chapter 54-58. One of the masked women in white robes extended her hand to block in front of Su Shanshan and company. She sneered and said very rudely, "What, you want to just let it go after bumping into others? Don't you have a mouth and don't know how to apologize?" Little Canon Fong Su was so angry that she raised her scabbard and blocked in front of that woman. She roared angrily, "What are you doing? Woman, do you want to fight? You're pointing your sister." The city guards' hearts were about to turn cold. They had managed to persuade one group of grandmothers with great difficulty, but they didn't expect the other group to cause trouble. These grandmothers had been arguing here for almost half an hour. Some of the people queuing behind were already impatiently making a ruckus. If not for the fact that these girls didn't look like noble young misses from ordinary families, and all of them looked like cultivators with sabers and swords, the crowd would have already started making a ruckus. Everyone more or less still had a trace of reverence towards cultivators. Seeing the two groups of people making a ruckus, most people had the mindset that the less trouble the better. If they could wait a little longer, then they would wait a little longer. It didn't matter if it was temporary. But these two groups of women were quarreling endlessly. Especially that group of celestial maidens in white robes and veils. Why did they seem to be unforgiving when they were in the right? The other party had already agreed to go to the side to deal with the matter, but they still had to crowd around the city gate and make a ruckus. The group of girls in white robes had a large number of people, estimated to number in the hundreds. Did they not know what was going on when they continued to quarrel endlessly? Did they not know that they had already made people very unhappy by blocking the gate for so long? Most importantly, these women had no self-awareness at all. They were clearly dressed as celestial maidens, but when they quarreled, they were even fiercer than shrews. Seeing the two groups of people quarreling so fiercely, the faces of the two city guards also turned cold. One of them turned and said to the girl in white who was making the most of a ruckus, "This lady, can you go to the side to deal with your matter? Don't block the way in and out of the city. You are making it very difficult for us to deal with you like this." Unexpectedly, the girl in white robes immediately scowled and glared at the guard coldly. "Impudent! You dog slaves, is this how you receive the guests from Suhagua? Do you know the status of our princess? You are simply rude." Arbor walked past the noisy girl in white and quickly walked to Su Shanshan in company. Eldest senior sister. Su Shanshan heard the voice and turned around. Her eyes immediately revealed a joyful smile. Junior sister. Junior sister. All of the holy water sect's disciples simultaneously crowded around her, joy flashing across their faces. Little junior sister actually ran to the city gate to welcome them personally. From the looks of it, little junior sister must have missed each other very much like them. "Hello, senior sisters." Xiao Mu's lips tugged into a rare smile, momentarily stupefying all the holy water sect sisters. One had to know that it was very rare for her junior sister to show a smile to others. A trace of disdain flashed in the eyes of the white-clothed woman who was leading the ruckus. She coldly interrupted, "Are you done acknowledging your relatives? Once you're done, come and settle the matter between us." Su Shanshan and the others silently glanced at their junior sister. As expected, the little stoic's originally smiling face froze in the blink of an eye. "I'm talking to senior sister, why are you interrupting? Who are you?" The little stoic coldly turned towards the woman in white who spoke. Chapter 54-59. That woman was clearly taken aback by the little stoic's attitude. She sized up the stoic face with a hard-to-conceal anger in her eyes. She looked at the woman in front of her. Her clothes were just a bit more luxurious and exquisite, but her small face was as exquisite and beautiful as jade. Unfortunately, her face was expressionless, and her entire person looked excessively icy. "And who are you? You dare to yell at us here? Is this how you treat your guests in the divine great land?" The city guards even broke out in a cold sweat when they glanced at her. After the little crown princess's repeated heroic deeds, it could be said that there was no one in the entire Dragon Flame city who didn't know this little stoic crown princess. Now that they saw this woman courting disaster in front of the crown princess, they couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. One of the city guards even took a few steps forward with a defeated expression. Just as he was about to speak, Arbor raised his hand to stop him. "Repeat yourself if you have the guts." The young crown prince consort said coldly. Her voice was crisp and clear, like the tinkling of beads falling on a jade plate. It made people's hearts tremble. That woman in white glanced at her timidly and actually didn't dare to repeat herself. This exquisite-looking woman in front of her really didn't look like someone to be trifled with. Those women beside her who were also wearing white veils also noticed some clues and felt that the little stoic didn't look like someone to be trifled with. They hastily stepped forward and advised in unison, "Xiao Xiao, let it go. We came from afar as guests, so it's not good to fall out with our host." "That's right, just treat it as your bad luck. Besides, Shue is fine. She was just pushed by someone, so don't be so angry." The little stoic couldn't help but fly into a rage. "Who are you calling Jojo?" Su Shanshan. The women surrounding Miss Xiao Xiao couldn't help but turn around to glance at Arbor in astonishment. Why did this stoic face suddenly get angry? Flames of fury rose in Arbor's heart, and he glared at that Miss Xiao Xiao with a sullen expression. That little appearance of his made it seem as if he wanted to tear the other person apart. His stare caused the other person's hair to stand on end, and the other person couldn't help but take 2 steps back. Little Canon Fong Su also scolded angrily, "You woman, how can you tarnish my little junior sister's reputation? A pretentious bitch like you dares to call yourself Jojo? You must have eaten a bear's heart and leopard's guts." The group of white-robed female immortals looked dumbfoundedly at the holy water sex people who were filled with righteous indignation. Are these people idiots? What did it have to do with them what the sisters' names were? What did she mean by tarnishing her junior sister's reputation? What kind of inexplicable madness was this? "Who are you people?" Xiao Mu asked coldly with a dark face. The 2 guards hurriedly stepped forward. Reporting to the Crown Princess, these women in white are accompanying Princess Mingzhu of Suheguo to attend the little prince's 1-month-old celebration. Crown Princess. Xiao Xiao and the others, who were originally pestering endlessly, couldn't help but have a slight change in expression when they heard this. This really was an extremely terrible encounter. Why would they encounter the Crown Princess at this shabby city gate? When that Miss Xiao Xiao recalled her previous disrespect, she couldn't help but tremble all over. Miss Xiao Xiao only felt that her throat was a bit dry, so she hastily stepped forward and whispered with a fawning smile, "Apologies, Crown Princess. Just now, we didn't know of your honorable identity. Please be magnanimous and forgive us for offending you." Could the little Crown Princess be a magnanimous person? This fellow asked with a sullen expression, "Where are the Crown Princess' personal guards?" Chapter 5460. As soon as she finished speaking, several hundred pitch-black figures darted out from all directions and attacked those delicate white-clothed female immortals without a word. The hidden guards' movements weren't gentle at all. They directly yanked the veils on those white-clothed young ladies' faces and gave them a good beating before chasing them out of the city gate. The citizens lining up to enter the city were practically stupefied. Fortunately, the hidden guards acted with great propriety and tacitly chased the people out of the city, so it didn't cause an even greater commotion. Suheguo's female immortals couldn't help but be about to die from anger. They had never seen such a rude and unreasonable person who attacked them without a second word, wanting to throw them out of the city. How could their Suheguo suffer such a huge loss in front of everyone's eyes? How could these women not be so angry that their hearts ached? It was truly rare to see someone so rude and unreasonable when they were guests in someone else's home. Arbor criticized endlessly in her mind and glared at that Miss Xiao Xiao with disdain. Simply outrageous. She actually called herself Jojo like her. Little Canon Fong Su was right. Such a pretentious thing simply sullied her great name. She had to give her a beating and chase her out so that Sir Jojo wouldn't be displeased. She hated seeing people like the Saintess the most. Who was she trying to impress by walking out with a white veil? If she really cherished her appearance so much and didn't want to be seen by the general public, why didn't she freaking stay at home and not come out? She was afraid of being seen by others when she came out. Just how beautiful was she? Disgusting. Sir Jojo felt nauseous and vomited. Needless to say, Su Shanshan and the others couldn't help but cover their faces when they saw this familiar formula and familiar series of actions. So many years had passed, but the little crown princess was still so adorable. Su Shanshan and the others were simply about to die from laughing at the little stoic. Su Shanshan did her best to suppress the smile on her lips and walked up to hold her little junior sister's soft hand. "Jojo, don't be angry. Let's go back earlier. It's annoying to stand here for too long. Eldest senior sister, how did you get into an argument with those idiots?" Fong Su, the little cannon, opened her mouth and started to attack. "It's all because of those pretentious immortals and saintesses who always pretend to be immortals and saintesses. They snatched the team to enter the city and accidentally bumped into our eldest senior sister. Then, they blindly said that we bumped into them. Nagging on and on, what the hell is so annoying? Then can't we beat them up and kick them out?" The little stoic blinked and made a chopping motion with her hand. "Or I might as well go all the way. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over." The corner of Su Shanshan's mouth twitched, and she hastily reached out to grab the little stoic's arm. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she said, "Where exactly did you learn this from?" "Forget it, it's just a small matter." Su Shanshan smiled and said, "They are guests from afar. If we don't want to see them, we can just chase them away." Arbor nodded when he heard this. In his heart, he was still wondering, when did mother send an invitation to this Suhugwa? Could it be that they had received the news and rushed over to attend the full moon banquet? At least, in her impression, she had never heard of this Suhugwa. Jojo angrily thought, why did all kinds of cats and dogs want to come to the palace? That's right, senior sister, why don't I see second Ant Master? Second Ant Master went to buy wine to drink as soon as he entered the city. Su Shanshan couldn't resist rolling her eyes. That's truly too regretful. The little stoic looked at eldest senior sister with bright eyes. "I have good news to tell you." Chapter 54-61. "Oh, what's the good news?" Su Shanshan and the rest looked at her with great interest. Unexpectedly, this junior martial sister's little stoic face was taut as she met their expectant gazes. Then, she strode forward. "Forget it, I'll tell you when we return to the Eastern Palace. I don't want you to cry so loudly that you attract the city guards. People might think that I'm bullying you. Everyone, little junior sister, you'll lose us sooner or later if you do this." Seriously, this child was just saying that she was cute, but now she didn't seem cute at all. On the other side, Suhugwa's group of female fairies were thrown out of the city gate by the young crown princess's hidden guards. They were all in an extremely wretched state. Lady Qiao Qiao was so angry that her eyes turned red. She shouted sternly, you actually threw Suhugwa's group out of the city? Today, they had really embarrassed themselves in the sea of forgetfulness. Nothing could save them from losing face. Suhugwa's group of maidservants actually had their dignity trampled on by the crown princess of the divine land. They had just entered the sovereign capital and were mercilessly thrown out. This was simply infuriating. The satin in Lady Qiao Qiao's hand that she used to block attacks was cut into pieces by a hidden guard's sword. Her eyes were almost spitting fire. This was too much. This was too much. Stop. Why aren't you stopping? A stern shout suddenly sounded. Amidst the commotion, the hidden guards ignored the woman's angry voice and directly threw out the hundreds of white-clothed female fairies. Among them, there were a dozen or so female fairies who were quite skilled. They weren't thrown out in the beginning. When the secret guards saw this, they couldn't do anything about it. They simply went up and beat him up before throwing him out. After this operation, the city guards were dumbfounded. The commotion had already alarmed the small leaders of the city guards. When they ran over to take a look, before they could even take a breath, they saw a black-clothed hidden guard walk up and flash a waist token at them. These small leaders of the city guards really sucked in a breath of cold air. This waist token was clearly the waist token of the Eastern Palace's master's personal guard. So these black-robed youths who suddenly attacked were from the Eastern Palace? There was a saying going around the entire imperial capital, "Don't mess with your crown prince. He's not someone you can mess with." Compared to the crown prince, your crown princess is even more difficult to deal with. The crown prince of the Eastern Palace's recent disregard of his own family had caused everyone in the imperial court to feel threatened. Everyone knew that the two fiends in the Eastern Palace were not to be trifled with. Thus, when they saw that it was the crown prince's personal guard, the two guards didn't say anything. They just bowed and cooperated. He even hurriedly called for a group of city guards to block Su Hegua and the others who wanted to enter and argue. "Get out of the way." A cold voice sounded from behind the crowd. They saw a graceful young girl dressed in white and wearing a white veil standing at the city gate, staring at them coldly. "I want to speak to your crown princess." The two hidden guards stretched out their arms to block her path like emotionless mechanical puppets. The white-veiled young girl looked at the young crown princess's back and couldn't help but shout angrily, "Crown princess, if you chase out our Su Hegua's people like this, you won't be able to explain yourself to His Majesty." A trace of anger flashed across Xiao Qiao's eyes. Chapter 54-62. She reached out to support an extremely frail masked woman who couldn't even take 2 breaths after taking 2 steps forward. The masked woman complained, "Princess, that woman is simply unreasonable. I think we should just take out the things and show them, lest others think that we don't have a backer and can be beaten and scolded as we wish." The white-veiled princess frowned and glanced coldly at Xiao Qiao. "Leave. Today's matter was truly too rash and impetuous. It was originally a small matter, but now the matter had been upgraded." Both sides were somewhat embarrassed. If the little crown princess heard the princess's thoughts, she would definitely snort and tell her, "I don't feel embarrassed, but you are really embarrassed." The woman walked up and shouted at the distant Xiao Mu, who was separated by a group of expressionless black-clothed hidden guards, "Crown Prince Consort, please wait. We are guests invited by old concubine Su. We are also old concubine Su's family. You rudely drove us out of the imperial city. Even if this matter is mentioned to old concubine, His Majesty, and the Empress, it's not justifiable." There was complete silence all around. The young lady shouted so loudly that even an ordinary person would have heard her clearly. Someone immediately whispered to each other as they asked with puzzlement in their eyes, "Who are they? They are so arrogant, daring to challenge Her Highness the Crown Prince Consort in public." Now in the entire Dragon Flame City, whether it was the common people, the officials in the capital, or the madams and misses of aristocratic families, who dared to provoke this little jinx, the crown princess. Weren't they afraid of being scolded? Weren't they afraid of being beaten until they couldn't find their bearings? Weren't they afraid of being beaten by the crown prince until they couldn't turn back? In such a situation, they were driven away by the crown princess, but they didn't get out of here obediently. Where did this Su Heguo woman come from? How dare she provoke their crown princess again and again? There were also insiders who whispered, "I've heard about this Su Heguo. It's said that one of our former emperor's concubines came from Su Heguo." No wonder. Just now, the woman said that they were old Princess Su's family. I'm afraid that she wanted to make friends with the crown princess. That person couldn't help but curl his lips. Who didn't know that the two from the Eastern Palace were ruthless people who didn't recognize their own family? Old concubine Su had nothing to do with them at all. Even if they were related, an ant-like madam of the Ministry of State Security would still be sent to the 18th level of hell by the crown prince when she made a mistake. Therefore, this Princess Su Heguo was still quite naive. She did not know how she would negotiate with the crown princess. Arbor frowned and stopped in his tracks. Su Shanshan glanced at her junior sister. Seeing that she was still expressionless, she could not help but say, "Junior sister, I've troubled you. If it wasn't for them, little junior sister wouldn't have fought with Suhugwa's group. Now, the situation had become a little ugly. Since the other party had already introduced themselves, if little junior sister still ignored them, who knew if it would affect her when it got to the palace? Troublesome, the little stoic muttered. She clung onto Su Shanshan's arm and trotted back a few steps. The group stopped in front of Suhugwa's white-veiled princess. The little stoic's gaze flitted across the princess's face. Chapter 54-63. She only took a glance before immediately retracting her gaze. She shifted her gaze to the side and couldn't resist taking a few more glances at the maidservant standing next to the white-veiled princess. When the white-veiled princess saw that she had returned, she couldn't help but inwardly sigh in relief and was about to say a few gentle words. Just then, she heard the young crown princess ask crisply, "You? Who are you? This crown princess finds you a bit familiar. Have I seen you before?" The white-veiled princess was startled and turned to look at the personal maidservant following closely behind her. The other party had her head lowered apathetically, turning a deaf ear to the young crown princess's words. The little stoic knitted her brows and shot a severe gaze at the white-veiled princess. The white-veiled princess Suhegwo's heart couldn't help but thump fiercely, and she hastily explained, "Crown princess, please calm down. This princess's personal maidservant is deaf and mute. She can't hear what the crown princess is saying." Arbor raised a brow. However, the little canon Fong Su couldn't resist snickering. "Who are you trying to fool? You're a princess, yet you have a deaf and mute person by your side to serve you. Could it be that you two don't communicate normally? You don't need her to do anything for you. Could it be that the two of you have to gesticulate every day before you can match up to each other's needs?" This whatever princess spoke insincerely. She could tell she wasn't too honest with a glance. The little canon Fong Su rambled on, "I think she's just guilty and doesn't dare to speak. She's afraid that our little junior sister will recognize her." The group of Suhegwo maidservants next to the white-veiled princess were so angry that smoke was about to come out of their heads. Where exactly did these weirdos come from? What kind of maidservants did their princess choose to have by her side and how she communicated with them? They were truly too meddlesome. The white-veiled princess also couldn't help but clamor in her mind, "Guilty my ass. What's wrong with her liking a deaf and mute maidservant? Does she need to be guilty?" Arbor sized up the deaf and mute maidservant from head to toe, and her brows creased slightly. It wasn't that she was deliberately looking for trouble and wanted to make things difficult for this Suhegwo princess. The deaf-mute maidservant by her side gave her a sense of familiarity at first glance. Generally, there were only two kinds of people who left an impression on her: friends and family, enemies. Obviously, this person didn't seem like a relative. Therefore, Arbor couldn't help but be curious. He wanted to lift her veil and take a look. With this thought in mind, her hands moved even faster. She stretched out her 5 fingers and grabbed at the white veil on the deaf-mute's face. The white-veiled princess was shocked. She quickly reached out to block the little crown princess's claws and shouted, "What are you doing?" When Xiao Mu failed to grab her, she saw that woman lower her head and take a step back, and she sneered in her heart. "Men, remove the veils from these women's faces. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. These people really deserved a beating." The little stoic didn't have much patience to begin with, especially towards people she didn't like. Her patience quickly came to an end, and she directly ordered the hidden guards to take action, planning to end the battle quickly. Unexpectedly, after this order was passed down, all the Suhegwo maidservants present simultaneously trembled and continuously retreated. As if they were about to be stripped naked and humiliated, shrill screams rose one after another. That young lady called Xiao Qiao was even more horrified. She pressed her hands firmly against the white veil on her face, and her entire body trembled as she wailed and howled. This series of actions stunned everyone present. Chapter 54-64. No one could understand what they were doing. Each and every one of them clutched the veils on their faces, as if they had done something unpardonable in Arbor. They were so ashamed and indignant that their eyes were red, as if they were about to die from being hit by a pillar. Sir Jojo had an innocent expression as he turned to meet Su Shanshan and the others' eyes in astonishment. He pointed at the shrieking Suheguo women and asked, "What's wrong with them?" Little Canon Fong Su seriously considered for a moment before saying hesitantly, "Could it be that their faces were all destroyed when they were born, so they're all extremely ugly and can't be seen in public? That's why they're so extreme and itching to fight with their lives on the line when they saw little junior sister giving the order to remove their veils." The little stoic looked at the chaos and felt that little Canon Fong Su's analysis was on point. She nodded with a look of sudden realization. No wonder these women are so delicate and pretentious, all wearing veils. So it's because they're ugly and can't be seen in public. Everyone couldn't help but twitch their mouths. Fuck, why did they inexplicably feel like the little crown princess's words were a bit harsh? Someone couldn't resist sneaking a glance at that Suheguo princess and saw that her eyes were bloodshot from anger under her veil. However, they heard the little crown princess say in deadly earnest, "Then it's not good to blame them too much. After all, in many of their eyes, a woman's appearance is greater than the heavens. If their ugly faces are exposed in front of others, it will indeed be very embarrassing for them." Little Canon Fong Su nodded. "Little junior sister, then let's not force them and forcefully remove their veils. Otherwise, if they can't face their ugly faces, it'll also be quite troublesome if rows of them seek death." The little crown princess made her decision on the spot and waved her hand to dismiss most of the hidden guards. "You're right. Since we know the reason, we can't force them like this. Other people have their own reasons for wearing a white veil to cover their faces," the little stoic said indifferently. "It can't be helped that they're ugly, so it's not good to be too harsh on them." Everyone, as they resisted the hidden guards and protected their veils, they also heard the crown princess and Fong Su speak of them like this. It angered those Suheguo ladies so much that they almost fainted. "Who's ugly? Your family is the ugly one who can't be seen in public and can only use a veil to cover your face." Was this crown prince consort an idiot? How could she come up with such a conclusion? This truly infuriated the ladies of the Suha kingdom so much that their hearts, livers, spleens, and lungs ached. They glared with burning eyes at the young crown prince consort. "You don't need to take off the others' veils, so just take hers." The little stoic pointed at the deaf-mute woman who was retreating backwards, her sharp eyes flickering slightly. "Even if you want to hide, you have to see if you can hide in front of her." The more she looked at the deaf-mute girl, the more she felt that she was very familiar. Just by looking at her sparkling eyes, she felt as if she had met her before. Who could it be that was masked but gave her a sense of familiarity? Arbor muttered in a low voice. He looked up at the deaf-mute girl who was being restrained by the secret guards and whose arms were being forcefully twisted. "Raise your head," Arbor shouted coldly. A royal guard then forcefully twisted the girl's face and raised it. Arbor reached out her small hand and gestured with her eyes. She stared at her evasive eyes from a distance and suddenly sneered, "So it's you. It's truly been a long time since Du Chunjiang left." Chapter 54-65. The Suha maidservant, whose chin was pinched, shuddered all over. Tears welled up in her eyes, as if she had suffered an enormous injustice and grievance. She kept twisting her body in an attempt to break free from the hidden guard's grip, biting her lips tightly without uttering a single word. Everyone was a bit confused, and their gazes simultaneously roamed back and forth between Xiao Mu and this woman. Crown Princess of China. Don't push it too far. Suha Nation's white-veiled princess was about to vomit blood from Arbor's domineering attitude. She clenched her fists tightly as she glared coldly at Xiao Mu. She shouted angrily, "This is my, Suheguo's, maidservant. If I say that she doesn't understand etiquette and offends you, the crown prince consort. If you want to teach her a lesson, then this princess should be the one to do it. It's not up to outsiders to comment. Arbor didn't waste any more words with her. She looked up and coldly swept a glance over this Suha nation's princess. She nodded. Then you take off her veil. The little crown princess was too obsessed with this maidservant's veil. Suha nation's white-veiled princess knitted her brows and couldn't help but ask furiously, Crown princess, although Suha nation's maidservant is a servant, she's still a servant of our Suha nation. It has nothing to do with China, you're spouting so much nonsense. Are you going to take it off or not? I'm giving you face so you can take it off yourself. Do you really think you're someone important? A cold glint appeared in the little crown princess's eyes, and the meaning she revealed was also very clear. Today, this Suha nation's maidservant's veil had to be taken off whether she wanted to or not. She was going to take it off. The white-veiled princess took a deep breath and fiercely suppressed her bellyful of resentment. She tried her best to speak to this stoic face in a relatively steady voice, our Suha nation's women must wear veils before marriage. This is our nation's custom. We hope that the crown princess will forgive us. Seeing Arbor take a step forward, the white-veiled princess of Suha also took a step forward and raised her hand in front of the maid. Her eyes flashed and she said coldly, could it be that the crown princess wants to take my maid back to the East Palace? Once the veil of our Suha state's women is lifted, they can only marry. The two secret guards silently retracted their hands and looked in the direction of the little crown princess. Arbor blinked and turned to look at Grand Senior Sister and Little Pao. What does she mean? I have to marry her just because I took off her veil. Everyone was speechless. Can't I, the crown princess, remove the veil? The crown princess can reveal it. A cold voice came from outside the crowd, accompanied by the sound of the wheels of the chariot. But my grandniece Su-yi has already made it very clear. If you take off her maid's veil, the crown princess, you must take her back to the East Palace. Please consider carefully, the crown princess. A woman wearing a beige robe walked down from the chariot with the help of someone. Her robe was embroidered with purple-blue flowers, and a pair of rose ruby earrings hung from her ears. Her lips were tightly pursed. This woman was about 40 years old, and her eyes were very cold and sharp. Xiao Mu glanced at her in bewilderment. Who is this person? Several secret guards couldn't help but twitch their mouths. They hurriedly walked up and whispered to Arbor. When Arbor heard that this person was Grand Concubine Su, a trace of confusion flashed through her eyes. She had been in the palace for so long, but she had never heard of Grand Concubine Su. She was stunned when someone suddenly walked up to her and said that she was the former emperor's concubine. Chapter 54-66. Grand Concubine Fong had some contact with them before. Since Empress Dowager Chen was killed, the former emperor's concubines were like invisible people and never came out again. Arbor looked Grand Concubine Su up and down. Judging from her age, she was probably only 10 years old when she entered the palace, right? She was probably unlucky that the former emperor died not long after she entered the palace, so she had never heard of this person. Anyone who had a son or a daughter, even the unreliable old Prince Jian Pain, would have some filial piety. As long as the mother didn't die, after reporting to His Majesty, he would usually take his biological mother out of the palace to live and take care of her. This Grand Concubine Su, judging from her tone, she was the grandaunt of Suha State's white-veiled princess. Arbor looked at her again and didn't answer her. Her eyes were still coldly staring at Su Hegua's maidservant. Grand Concubine Su said faintly, Crown Princess, have you thought it through? This is the rule of our Suha State. Arbor looked up at her and sneered, Grand Concubine Su, have you forgotten that you have been married to Shenzhou State for decades? Isn't it too ridiculous to keep saying that Suha State's rules are rules? Grand Concubine Su didn't get angry. She glanced at Arbor and nodded gently, although I have been married to Shenzhou state for many years, I am still a person of Suha state. I'm just kindly reminding the Crown Princess not to be impulsive and bring unnecessary trouble to the East Palace. After all, the Crown Princess and His Highness the Crown Prince have always been deeply in love. The Crown Princess doesn't want another woman to take away His Highness's favor. Arbor turned to look at Little Pao. What does she mean? Little Pao was about to die from anxiety and hurriedly said, what else can she mean? This old woman means that as long as you remove the veil of Su Hegua's maidservant, His Highness the Crown Prince will follow you. This maid belongs to the Crown Prince. She must follow you back to the Eastern Palace. Arbor said, oh. Little Canon Fong Su didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her stoic face. She quickly grabbed her hand and said, little junior sister, don't fall for their tricks. How could Jojo be fooled? Arbor patted her hand to comfort her. After that, she turned to look in the direction of old concubine Su and said coldly, open it. After receiving the Crown Princess's order, the two secret guards did not hesitate. Even if this ugly woman might rely on them in the future, they couldn't care less. The secret guard tore off the veil on the woman's face. Under the veil was a face the size of a palm. Although it wasn't very beautiful, it wasn't ugly either. However, this mediocre appearance caused Xiao Mu to be slightly taken aback. She remembered that the Yaoguang Saintess's face was very delicate and pretty. It was definitely not the ordinary face in front of her. Old concubine Su sneered, the Crown Princess doesn't listen to other people's advice. Then I have to report it to His Majesty. Crown Princess, please take this maidservant back to the East Palace first. Arbor glanced at her and rolled her eyes. Su Hegua's rules are Su Hegua's rules. This Crown Princess's rules are Su Hegua's rules. I ignore all the rules of Su Hegua. Old concubine Su's eyes widened and her aura was released. I have reminded the Crown Princess before. She is so arrogant and domineering. Even in front of His Majesty and Her Majesty, what the Crown Princess did today is not justified. Arbor glanced at her coldly. Chapter 54-67. Don't blame this Crown Princess for not reminding you. Colluding with someone from the heavenly fate realm, die. The young Crown Princess's words completely suppressed Grand Consort Su's aura. Everyone present kept quiet out of fear and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They only felt that the little stoic's awe-inspiring appearance weighed heavily on their hearts. What do you mean? Grand Consort Su's face was abnormally cold and furious, and she clenched her fists tightly inside her sleeves. The literal meaning. Arbor said coldly, don't tell me you think a mere transformation talisman can fool this Crown Princess. What do you take this Crown Princess for? And what do you take the entire divine province for? Little Su Heguo, you're ignorant and conceited. You're bound to bring about your own destruction. Grand Consort Su's breathing stopped, and Princess Su Heguo couldn't help but shrink her neck. She hastily stepped forward and tugged at Grand Consort Su's elbow. A female freak who willingly accepted transformation delusionally wants to enter the Eastern Palace. Arbor sneered and scolded rudely, your face must be as big as the sun, right? Princess Su Heguo hastily said, Crown Princess, don't make irresponsible remarks. What do you mean by that transformation talisman? Who used a transformation talisman? Whoever used it knows. Arbor flung her sleeves, and 3 talisman forces immediately burrowed out of her sleeves and pounced at the maidservant of Su Heguo who was continuously retreating. That maidservant nimbly dodged many times and somersaulted a few times in the air, barely evading the talisman's light. Just as she took a deep breath but didn't have time to exhale. Suddenly, a purple light abruptly leaped into her conscious. The transformation talisman's talisman force was removed too quickly, almost in the blink of an eye. The maidservant in front of her had simultaneously transformed her body, limbs, and appearance. Under everyone's watchful eyes in broad daylight, it was simply like a dramatic transformation of a living person was staged. Everyone was stupefied by this scene. Grand Consort Su's complexion was especially ashen. She clenched her fists tightly as a bad premonition slid through her heart. Could it be that the current emperor of Suheguo, her nephew, was unable to bear the pressure of fate and had already joined in? What should they do? Her palms were sweating profusely, and the cold sweat seemed to be free as it trickled down from her forehead. Old concubine Su forced herself to calm down and said quickly, "Crown Princess, this matter still needs to be discussed." This maid should be, the Suha country's white-veiled princess reacted very quickly. When she saw this change, she immediately screamed and revealed a look of disbelief. "What's going on? Yao Yao, you, what is wrong with you? Your face is actually a fake face." Your height, Yao Guang's saintess recovered. She was much taller and slimmer than before. Most importantly, her ordinary face had become extremely beautiful and dazzling. After she had grown taller, her original clothes did not fit her body size at all. They all shrunk up to her wrists and ankles. Her clothes were too short. "Nya Yaoguang, I thought you were dead. I didn't expect you to be so capable. You are still alive now." Not only was she alive, but she could even run in front of her and pretend to be dead. If she sneaked into the palace secretly, she didn't know what she would do. Nia Yaoguang was exposed, but she didn't panic at all. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.